The two graves stood stark against the darkening sky, wooden crosses, weathered by 5 years of desert sun and winter storms. Jonas Cutter knelt between them, a half-empty whiskey bottle in one hand, his old army Colt in the other. The barrel felt cold against his temple as thunder rolled across the distant mesas. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rising wind. "Lizzie, I'm tired." His finger tightened on the trigger. 5 years of emptiness. 5 years of whiskey that couldn't fill the hollow where his heart used to be. 5 years of talking to wooden crosses while the land around him turned to dust. A sharp knock at his cabin door cut through the moment. Jonas lowered the gun slowly, almost reluctantly, and turned toward the sound. No one came to his place. Not anymore. The town of Redemption had long since decided Jonas Cutter wasn't worth saving, and he'd made it clear he wanted it that way. The knock came again, more insistent. Jonas tucked the Colt into his belt and took a long pull from the bottle. Whoever had come calling in a gathering storm was about to be disappointed. "Go away," he called, his voice rough from disuse. Instead, the knock repeated 3 sharp raps that felt like a command. Cursing under his breath, Jonas staggered to his feet. At 45, he moved like a much older man, the legacy of too many battles, too many wounds, and too much whiskey. The cabin door creaked as he yanked it open, ready to send whoever stood there back into the gathering darkness. The words died in his throat. An elderly Apache woman stood on his porch, her deeply lined face weathered like the desert itself. In her arms, she carried a small bundle that squirmed and made soft mewling sounds, a baby wrapped in deerskin. Behind her stood 3 younger women, their faces drawn with exhaustion and weariness. The old woman's eyes, black as obsidian, fixed on Jonas with unsettling directness. "You owe me a life," she said in accented English. Jonas felt a cold that had nothing to do with the approaching storm. "I don't know you," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, something flickered at the edges of his memory. A time long ago when he'd lain bleeding in a ravine, an arrow buried deep in his side. "Running Hawk," the old woman said, naming herself. "I pulled arrow from your side at Yellow Creek 16 summers ago. I stopped the bleeding when your soldier brothers left you for dead." Jonas's hand unconsciously moved to his right side to the knotted scar that still ached in cold weather. He had never seen the face of the woman who had saved him that day, had assumed she was long dead along with most of her people. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice harder than he'd intended. Running Hawk lifted the bundle slightly. "Sanctuary, for them." She nodded to the 3 women behind her. "And for the child." Jonas looked past her at the women. The tallest stood like a sentinel, her face expressionless but her eyes sharp with intelligence. The middle one's gaze remained downcast, her hands clasped before her. The youngest, barely more than a girl, had a noticeable swell beneath her buckskin dress. Pregnant and far along. "There's a reservation 30 miles north," Jonas said, the whiskey making his tongue loose. "Government takes care of your people now." Running Hawk's expression didn't change. "Reservation is where they hunt us now. Where my son, the chief, was hanged for speaking against the agent who starved our children." Thunder cracked closer, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. The baby in Running Hawk's arms started to cry, a thin, reedy sound that cut through Jonas like a knife. "These are what remain of my son's people," the old woman continued. "The wives of warriors. El Carnicero and his men attacked our village 3 days ago. The men fought so we could escape." Her voice remained steady, but her eyes held the weight of witnessed horrors. None of the men survived. Jonas knew the name El Carnicero, the butcher, a Mexican bandit who had been terrorizing both sides of the border, known for his particular cruelty to Apache women and children. The army had a bounty on his head, but he remained elusive, hiding in the mountains between Arizona Territory and Mexico. "That's not my concern," Jonas said, even as the rain began to fall harder. "I can't help you." Running Hawk took a step closer, bringing the smell of wood smoke and sage with her. "The attack on your home 5 winters ago, it was not Apache who killed your wife and took your daughter." Jonas felt as if he'd been struck. His hand moved to the Colt at his belt. "What do you know about that?" he demanded, his voice a dangerous whisper. "I know what I have seen with my eyes. I know what my son told me before he died." Running Hawk's gaze was unflinching. "The men who came to your home wore Apache dress, painted their faces as our warriors do. But they were not of our people." "You're lying," Jonas said, but the conviction in his voice wavered. For 5 years he had nursed his hatred of the Apache, had blamed them for taking everything from him. The thought that he might have been wrong all this time was too much to bear. "You saved my life once," he said finally, his words nearly lost in a crack of thunder. "That debt is paid if I let you shelter for the night. 1 night. Then you move on." Running Hawk nodded once, a gesture of acceptance, though not necessarily agreement. "The storm comes. We accept your offer." Jonas stepped aside, allowing them to enter his cabin, a place that had seen no visitors in years. The interior was sparse, a rough wooden table, and 2 chairs, a small stove, a narrow bed against the far wall. The only personal touches were a faded daguerreotype of a smiling woman on the mantel and a small rag doll on a shelf, its fabric worn from handling. The women entered silently, the pregnant girl last her hand protectively over her swollen belly. Jonas noticed how the tall one positioned herself between him and the others, her eyes never leaving his hands. "You can use the storage shed for sleeping," Jonas said gruffly, reaching for his coat. "It's dry at least." "I am Grey Dove," the tall woman said suddenly, her English clearer than Running Hawk's. "This is Silent Rain," she indicated the middle woman, and Willow, the pregnant girl. "The child is Morning Star, daughter of my brother, the chief. She was born as our village burned." Jonas nodded stiffly, uncomfortable with the introductions, as if names would make them more than temporary intrusions in his life. "The shed is behind the cabin. I'll show you." As they followed him into the rain, Jonas felt the weight of the Colt in his belt and thought of the 2 graves on the hill. For 5 years, he had lived with one purpose: to join Sarah and Lizzie when the whiskey finally gave him courage enough. Now, these strangers had interrupted even that small mercy. The storage shed was little more than a 1-room structure with a dirt floor, but its roof was solid, and its walls would keep out the wind. Jonas lit a lantern and hung it from a hook in the ceiling, illuminating the space, some old crates, tools hanging on the walls, a pile of rough blankets in the corner. "It ain't much," he said, "but it's dry." Silent Rain. The middle woman moved immediately to arrange the blankets into pallets. Willow sank onto one, her hand still on her belly, her face lined with exhaustion. Grey Dove remained by the door, watching Jonas with unwavering attention. Running Hawk settled on a crate, the baby still in her arms. "We will not trouble you long," she said. "When the storm passes, we will find our way." Jonas nodded, already backing toward the door. "There's a pump out back for water. I'll bring some food in the morning." As he turned to leave, Running Hawk spoke again. "Your daughter may yet live." Jonas froze his back to the women, his hand on the door frame. The words hit him like a physical blow. He wanted to turn to grab the old woman and demand what she knew, but fear kept him rooted in place. Fear of hope. Hope was the cruelest thing a man in his position could feel. Without responding, he stepped out into the rain and pulled the door closed behind him. The storm had intensified, sheets of water cascading from the darkened sky. Jonas stood there, letting the rain soak through his clothes, as if it might wash away the past 15 minutes and return him to the simple clarity of his planned suicide. "Damn you," he whispered, unsure if he was cursing Running Hawk or himself. By the time he returned to his cabin, water pooled around his boots with each step. He stripped off his wet coat and hung it by the stove, then reached for the abandoned whiskey bottle. The familiar burn did nothing to quiet the turmoil in his mind. Running Hawk's words had opened a door he'd kept firmly shut for 5 years. Jonas moved to the mantel and picked up the daguerreotype. Sarah's face looked back at him, her smile frozen in time. They'd been married 10 years, had built this homestead together after he'd left the army. 10 years of trying for children without success, until the day they'd found Lizzie. The memory came unbidden, a raid on an Apache camp, women and children massacred. Among the bodies, a single survivor, a little girl of perhaps 4 years hiding beneath her dead mother. Jonas had been ordered to dispose of her by his commanding officer. Instead, he'd hidden her in his saddlebag and deserted that same night, unable to be part of such brutality any longer. He and Sarah had raised Lizzie as their own. She had brought light and laughter to their home, had healed something in both of them. And then, 5 years ago, while Jonas was in town trading, raiders had come. He'd returned to find Sarah's body mutilated in ways he still couldn't bear to remember. Of Lizzie, there had been no sign. Only a doll left behind, dropped in what appeared to be a struggle. The authorities had told him it was Apache raiders taking revenge for the army's brutality. Jonas had believed them because it was easier than any alternative, easier than facing his own guilt for not being there to protect them. But what if Running Hawk was telling the truth? Jonas set the daguerreotype down with shaking hands. He moved to the shelf and took down the rag doll, its fabric worn smooth by years of a child's love, and later by a grieving man's remembrance. He held it to his chest as he sank into his chair, the whiskey forgotten. Outside, the storm raged on the sound of rain on his roof, a steady drumming that had for 5 years been his only company on long, empty nights. But tonight, for the first time, other heartbeats pulsed on his property. Other breaths mingled with the desert air. Jonas closed his eyes, the doll still clutched in his weathered hands. The colt lay on the table before him, no longer at his temple, but no less present in his thoughts. He had planned to die tonight. Instead, he had opened his door to the people he had spent 5 years hating. Morning came with the crystalline clarity that follows desert storms. Jonas woke slumped in his chair, his neck stiff, the rag doll still in his hand. He tucked it away quickly, as if embarrassed by this show of sentimentality, and moved to the window. The land stretched out before him, washed clean by the night's rain, a brief reprieve from the drought that had held Arizona territory in its grip for 2 seasons. His property wasn't much: 20 acres of scrubland, a small corral with 2 horses, and a mule, a vegetable patch that yielded just enough to keep him from having to go to town too often. It had once been a working ranch, but he had let most of it go after Sarah and Lizzie. The door to the storage shed was open, and Jonas could see movement. The women were already awake, already adapting to their temporary shelter. He watched as Gray Dove emerged carrying a bucket toward the pump. She moved with purpose and strength, her long black hair pulled back, her buckskin dress practical rather than decorative. Jonas turned from the window and put coffee on to boil. He gathered what food he could spare. Jerky beans, the last of a loaf of bread that was only slightly stale. It wasn't much of an offering, but it was all he had. By the time he crossed the yard to the shed, the sun had risen fully, promising another scorching day. Gray Dove was outside, using a stone to sharpen what appeared to be a small knife. She looked up at his approach, but didn't speak. "Brought food," Jonas said gruffly, holding up the bundle. Gray Dove studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the shed. "Grandmother is inside with the baby." Jonas hesitated, then stepped past her into the shed. The interior was transformed from the night before. The women had rearranged the space, creating separate sleeping areas with the blankets. Silent Rain was grinding something in a small stone mortar. Herbs by the smell. Willow sat in a corner, humming softly as she wove what looked like a cradle from reeds and twigs. Running Hawk sat on the same crate as the night before, the baby Morning Star in her arms. The infant was awake, tiny fists waving in the air, her face scrunched in what might have been concentration. "I brought food," Jonas said again, setting the bundle on a crate. "It's not much." "We are grateful," Running Hawk replied. She studied him in the daylight, a tall man gone to leanness, his once dark hair and beard streaked with gray, his blue eyes bloodshot from years of drinking. "You slept with your daughter's doll." Jonas stiffened. "You said she might be alive. What did you mean?" Running Hawk handed the baby to Silent Rain, who took her with practiced ease. The old woman stood, her movements slow but deliberate. "I saw a girl with the mark," she said. "The mark like your daughter carried." Jonas's heart seemed to stop. "What mark?" "The crescent moon," Running Hawk replied. "Here." She touched her own shoulder. "The girl you called Lizzie had it, a small moon shape on her skin." Jonas felt dizzy. Lizzie's birthmark had been shaped like a crescent moon, a distinctive feature on her right shoulder. It wasn't something a stranger could know unless they had seen her. "Where?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Where did you see her?" "In the mountains near Diablo Canyon. 4 moons ago. She was with others gathering plants." 4 months ago. Jonas felt a surge of both hope and rage. "Why didn't you come tell me then?" "I did not know she was yours until my son told me before he died. He recognized her from stories I had told of the soldier who saved a child." Jonas ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. 4 months. She could be anywhere now. She could be dead. No, he couldn't think that way. If she had survived 5 years, there was hope. "How old?" he asked. "The girl you saw." "A woman, not a child," Running Hawk replied. "Perhaps 16 summers." The age was right. Lizzie would be 16 now, no longer the little girl who had played with that rag doll, but a young woman, a survivor. Was she? Jonas struggled to find the words. Was she well? Was she treated well? Running Hawk's expression softened slightly. She wore Apache dress. She moved freely. She was not a prisoner. Jonas tried to process this information. Lizzie alive. Lizzie living among the Apache. Lizzie perhaps willingly staying with the people he had blamed for her disappearance. "I have to find her," he said more to himself than to the women. "El Carnicero hunts her too." Running Hawk said, her voice suddenly grave. Jonas's head snapped up. "What? The one they call the Butcher. He seeks the child with the moon mark. It is why our village was attacked. He believed she was there." "Why would he want Lizzie?" Jonas asked, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. "There is a prophecy among the old ones," Running Hawk said. "A child born of 2 bloods bearing the mark of the moon will lead to the treasure of the ancestors. El Carnicero believes this. He has killed many searching for such a child. Jonas shook his head. That's superstition, nonsense. To you, perhaps. To him, it is worth murdering for. Running Hawk's gaze was steady. Your debt to me is not for one night's shelter. It is protection until we can reach our people in the north. In return, I will help you find your daughter. Jonas looked around the shed at the women watching him gray dove with her wary strength. Silent Rain with her downcast eyes but capable hands, Willow with her swollen belly and vulnerability, and the baby Morning Star, who gurgled in Silent Rain's arms, oblivious to the danger that had already claimed her father. He thought of his plan the night before, the gun at his temple, the release he had sought. That path was closed to him now, at least until he knew the truth about Lizzie. Until winter, he said finally. You can stay until winter comes. Then we head north to find your people. Running Hawk nodded once the agreement sealed. The baby needs milk, she said practically. Do you have a goat? Jonas almost laughed at the sudden shift to the mundane. No, no goat. He thought for a moment. There's a ranch 5 miles west. The woman there might have milk to spare. I'll ride over today. As he turned to leave, Silent Rain spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. The scar on your side. It pains you still. Jonas paused, surprised. Sometimes, in the cold. She held up the mortar with its ground herbs. I can make a poultice. It will ease the old wound. Jonas hesitated, then nodded stiffly. After I return. He wasn't used to accepting help, especially not from an Apache woman, but he was riding into a world where old hatreds would need to be set aside if he was to have any hope of finding Lizzie. As he crossed the yard back to his cabin, Jonas felt Grey Dove's eyes on him. He turned to find her still sharpening her knife, her gaze assessing. I don't trust you, she said simply. Jonas nodded. Fair enough, I don't trust you either. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Then we understand each other. She tested the blade with her thumb. If you betray us to El Carnicero, I will kill you while you sleep. Jonas found himself respecting her directness. If I was going to betray you, I'd have done it last night. Grey Dove shrugged. Perhaps, but a man can change his mind. So can a woman, Jonas replied. You could have killed me in my sleep last night. Grandmother forbade it, she said, and Jonas wasn't entirely sure she was joking. He left her to her task and entered his cabin to prepare for the ride to the neighboring ranch. As he gathered his saddlebags, his eyes fell on the rag doll on the shelf. He picked it up, running his thumb over the worn fabric face. I'm going to find you, Lizzie, he whispered. I promise. The Wilson Ranch lay 5 miles to the west, a modest spread run by a widow and her 2 grown sons. Martha Wilson was a practical woman who had survived 20 years on the frontier by being shrewd and self-sufficient. She greeted Jonas with surprise as he rode into her yard. Jonas Cutter, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Didn't expect to see you today, or any day for that matter. Martha, Jonas nodded. Need to buy some milk if you can spare it. Martha raised an eyebrow. Milk? You turning to baking in your old age? Jonas shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. It's for a baby. That got her attention. A baby? At your place. Her eyes narrowed. What aren't you telling me, Jonas? He sighed. Martha had always been too perceptive by half. I've got visitors, an Apache woman and her family. They need shelter for a while. Martha's expression changed concern, replacing curiosity. Apache Jonas, do you know what's happening out there? The territory's on fire with rumors. El Carnicero hit another village 3 days ago. Armies out looking for survivors. I know. These are the survivors. Martha was silent for a moment, processing this. Then she turned and called to the house. David, bring a jug of goat's milk out here. She turned back to Jonas. You're playing a dangerous game, Jonas. People in town are scared. Mayor Hollister's organizing a militia to protect the area. You know what that means. Jonas did indeed. Mayor Terrence Hollister had made no secret of his desire to drive all Apache from the territory reservation or not. He owned most of the businesses in town and had his eye on expanding. Native land was an obstacle to that ambition. I'm not playing any game, Jonas said. Just paying a debt. Martha's son David appeared with a clay jug, eyeing Jonas curiously. He was a good-looking young man of about 20, with his mother's practical nature and none of his late father's temper. Thanks, Jonas said, taking the jug and securing it in his saddlebag. He reached for his purse. Martha waved him off. No charge. But Jonas, be careful. Hollister's men were around here yesterday, asking questions about Apache sympathizers. Your name came up? Jonas frowned. My name, why? Martha glanced at her son, then back to Jonas. They haven't forgotten you deserted the army rather than follow orders to clear that camp. Some people have long memories. Jonas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. I appreciate the warning. There's more, David said, speaking up for the first time. They're saying El Carnicero isn't just killing for the sake of it. They say he's looking for something. Or someone. A child, Jonas said quietly. Martha's eyes widened slightly. You know about this. I know enough to be concerned, Jonas replied. Martha, have you heard anything about survivors from Apache camps? People taken in by other tribes, maybe? Martha studied him for a moment. This isn't just about paying a debt, is it? Jonas hesitated, then decided on honesty. The woman who's staying with me thinks she saw Lizzie 4 months ago in Diablo Canyon. Martha's hand went to her mouth. Oh, Jonas, are you sure? No, but I have to find out. David shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Cutter, I don't want to give you false hope, but there's been talk. Apache who escaped the reservations, forming new camps deep in the canyons. Mixed groups, survivors from different tribes, even some who they say aren't full Apache. Jonas's heart quickened. Where are these camps? No one knows for sure, David replied, but hunters have seen smoke in the mountains east of Diablo Canyon. Army patrols won't go up there. Too many places for ambush. Jonas nodded, his mind already plotting a route. Thank you, both of you. As he turned to leave, Martha called after him. Jonas, if Hollister's men come asking, we never saw you. Jonas touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, understanding the risk she was taking. Not everyone in Redemption shared Hollister's hatred of the Apache. The ride back to his homestead gave Jonas time to think. If Lizzie was alive, if she had somehow survived among the Apache all these years, what would she be like now? Would she even remember him? Would she want to be found? And what of Running Hawk's claim that Sarah's killers hadn't been Apache at all? Jonas had never questioned the official version of events. The bodies had been mutilated in ways consistent with Apache raids. But he also knew from his army days how easy it was to blame atrocities on the native tribes, how often white men had disguised themselves to commit acts they knew would be attributed to Indians. As Jonas crested the hill overlooking his property, he reined his horse to a stop. Something was wrong. The women were outside, gathered near the corral. Gray Dove stood slightly apart, her posture tense, her hand on the knife at her belt. Jonas urged his horse forward, scanning the area for threats. As he drew closer, he saw the cause of the disturbance, fresh hoof prints in the still damp soil around his property. Someone had circled his homestead while he was gone, someone who hadn't announced their presence or come to the door. Grey Dove met him as he dismounted. "Riders," she said without preamble. 4, maybe 5. They circled twice, then headed west. Jonas handed her the jug of milk. "When, an hour ago, Willow saw them first from inside. They wore no uniforms." Jonas cursed under his breath. Hollister's militia most likely scouting the area. Or worse, some of El Carnicero's men tracking the women from their destroyed village. "Did they see you?" he asked. "No, we stayed inside until they were gone." Jonas nodded, relieved at their caution. "Good. It's better if no one knows you're here yet." He looked at the tracks again. "I need to go to town, find out what's happening." Grey Dove's expression hardened. "You said we could stay." "And I meant it," Jonas replied. "But I need information if I'm going to keep you safe. And I need supplies, if you're staying through winter." Running Hawk approached the baby in her arms. "He speaks truth, Grey Dove. We cannot hide forever. We must know who hunts us." Grey Dove didn't look convinced, but she nodded reluctantly. "When will you go?" "Tomorrow," Jonas decided. "I'll leave at dawn, be back by nightfall." He looked at the women, considering. "One of you should come with me." Grey Dove's eyes widened in surprise. "Why?" "Because 4 women and a baby can't stay hidden here for long. The town needs to see that you're under my protection officially. It won't stop all trouble, but it might prevent some." Running Hawk considered this. "Grey Dove will go with you. She is strong, and she speaks good English." Grey Dove looked as if she wanted to protest, but held her tongue. Jonas could see the conflict in her eyes, distrust of him warring with duty to her family. "Fine," she said finally. "I will go, but know this. If you betray us, my knife will find your heart before your next breath." Jonas almost smiled. "I believe you." That evening, as twilight settled over the desert, Jonas sat on his porch cleaning his rifle. Inside the cabin, the women prepared a simple meal from what supplies he had. He had invited them to use his kitchen rather than cook over an open fire that might attract attention. Through the window, he could see Silent Rain showing Willow how to make a poultice from the herbs she had been grinding earlier. Running Hawk sat in Jonas's chair, the baby asleep in her arms. Grey Dove moved between them, helping where needed, but always keeping one eye on the door on Jonas. It was strange having others in his space after so many years of solitude. Strange to hear women's voices, to smell cooking food, to feel the energy of life inside walls that had held only grief for so long. Jonas's hand paused on the rifle barrel. 5 years he had lived with his hatred, 5 years blaming the Apache for taking everything from him. Now he had 4 Apache women and a baby under his roof, and the possibility that his daughter might still be alive among the very people he had cursed. The irony wasn't lost on him. The door opened, and Grey Dove stepped onto the porch, a tin cup in her hand. "Rain made tea for your wound," she said, offering the cup. Jonas took it, surprised by the gesture. "Thank you." Grey Dove didn't leave. Instead, she leaned against the porch railing, looking out at the darkening land. "Why did you help us?" she asked. Truth. Jonas considered lying, considered giving her the simple answer about repaying a debt to Running Hawk. But something in her directness demanded honesty. "I was going to kill myself last night," he said. "Had the gun to my head when your grandmother knocked." Grey Dove was silent for a moment, absorbing this. "And now Now I need to know if my daughter is alive." She nodded as if this answer satisfied her. "My brother the chief spoke of you sometimes, the white scout who would not kill children. He said there are two kinds of white men, those who see us as animals to be hunted, and those who see us as humans to be feared. He said you were neither." Jonas sipped the tea, its bitter herbal taste cutting through the ever-present whiskey on his tongue. "What did he say I was then? A man with a debt to both worlds. A man who could not choose sides." Jonas considered this. "Your brother was wiser than me." "He is dead now," Grey Dove said flatly. "Wisdom did not save him." Jonas had no answer for that. They sat in silence as darkness claimed the land, the first stars appearing overhead in the vast desert sky. "If your daughter lives," Grey Dove said finally, "what will you do? Take her back to your world?" It was a question Jonas had been avoiding. "I don't know. I just want to see her, to know she's safe." Grey Dove pushed away from the railing. "Safe is not a place, white man. Safe is who stands beside you when danger comes." She looked back at the cabin where her family waited. "Remember that tomorrow, when we go among your people." With that, she left him on the porch with his rifle and his thoughts. Jonas finished the tea, feeling the strange herbs working through his system, dulling the persistent ache in his side where an Apache arrow had once found its mark. Tomorrow would test them all. Tomorrow, the fragile piece of this unexpected arrangement would face its first real challenge. Jonas needed to know if the town would tolerate his protection of these women, needed to discover what Hollister and his militia were planning, needed to find any information about Apache survivors in the mountains. And somewhere beyond all that was Lizzie, if she lived. If Running Hawk had truly seen her, if 16 years of his daughter's life hadn't been erased by death after all. Jonas set the empty cup aside and resumed cleaning his rifle. His movements methodical, practiced. Whatever came tomorrow, he would be ready. 5 years of waiting for death had ended last night. Now, for the first time since he dug those 2 graves on the hill, Jonas Cutter found himself planning for a future. The future might be short. Grey Dove's knife, Hollister's militia, or El Carnicero's men could see to that. But it was a future nonetheless. And in that future, there was the faintest glimmer of something Jonas had long since abandoned: hope. Dawn broke over the Arizona territory with the harsh clarity that Jonas had come to associate with days that changed men's lives. He stood on his porch, rifle in hand, watching as the first golden rays touched the distant mesas. Behind him, through the open door, came the sounds of the women preparing for the day. Quiet voices, the clatter of his long unused cookware, the soft cries of the baby morning star being soothed. Grey Dove emerged from the cabin dressed in a buckskin dress, but with a faded woolen shawl draped over her shoulders, an attempt to look less conspicuously Apache. Her hair was braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, and she had removed most of her beaded ornaments. Only a single necklace remained, a small leather pouch hanging from a cord around her neck. "Ready?" Jonas asked, keeping his voice low. Grey Dove nodded, her expression unreadable. "Your town, your rules. I will follow." Jonas appreciated her practicality. "Stay close. Don't speak unless spoken to. If there's trouble, get back to the wagon and be ready to leave fast." "I am not afraid of white men," she said, a hint of defiance in her voice. "You should be," Jonas replied flatly, "especially ones in groups with guns and whiskey." She studied him for a moment. "You fear your own kind more than mine." It wasn't a question, so Jonas didn't answer. Instead, he moved toward the barn where he'd already hitched his wagon. The old mule Samson stomped impatiently, eager to be moving after days of inactivity. Running Hawk appeared at the door, Morning Star wrapped against her chest in a sling made from one of Jonas's old shirts. "Remember," she said to Grey Dove, "we need flour salt coffee and milk for the baby." Grey Dove nodded. "And news of the girl with the moon mark." "Quietly," Running Hawk cautioned. "The walls in white men's towns have ears." Jonas helped Grey Dove onto the wagon bench, then climbed up beside her. He looked back at the cabin where Silent Rain and Willow now stood with Running Hawk. They made a strange picture: 3 Apache women and a baby on the porch of a white man's homestead. 5 days ago, he would have considered the sight impossible. Now it felt almost natural, as if the universe had suddenly shifted onto a different track, carrying him along with it. "We'll be back by nightfall," Jonas said. "Keep the rifle by the door. Any strangers come, stay inside and out of sight." Running Hawk inclined her head in acknowledgement, her weathered face betraying no emotion. But as Jonas flicked the reins and set Samson in motion, she raised her hand briefly, not quite a wave, but a gesture of connection nonetheless. The town of Redemption lay 12 miles to the east, a journey of about 3 hours at Samson's plodding pace. Jonas and Grey Dove traveled in silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. The desert spread around them, a harsh but beautiful landscape of red rock and scrub brush, yucca and prickly pear, reaching toward the cloudless blue sky. "This land," Grey Dove said, finally breaking the silence, "it was my people's once." Jonas glanced at her. "It was. Now it's no one's and everyone's. The white man's way," she replied, "to claim what cannot be owned." "I didn't make the world this way," Jonas said, feeling defensive despite himself. Grey Dove's gaze remained on the horizon. "But you live in it. You benefit from it." Jonas couldn't argue with that. His homestead, modest as it was, stood on land that had once been Apache hunting grounds. He had purchased it legally, but the law itself was a white man's construct, imposed on a people who had different notions of property and belonging. "What will your town think?" Grey Dove asked, after another mile had passed beneath the wagon wheels. "A white man bringing an Apache woman." Jonas had been asking himself the same question. Some will mind their own business, some will stare, some will talk, and some— He left the sentence unfinished. "We'll want blood," Grey Dove completed for him. Jonas nodded grimly. "Hollister and his friends, most likely. The mayor owns half the businesses in town, wants to own the other half. He's been pushing for the army to clear more land for settlement." "By clear, you mean kill my people?" "Yes?" Grey Dove absorbed this information without visible reaction. "Why do you go against your own kind for us?" It was a fair question, one Jonas had been wrestling with since the moment he'd allowed them to stay. "I'm not sure I am," he said finally. "Running Hawk saved my life once. She says she saw my daughter alive. Those are debts and hopes that outweigh other considerations. And if she is wrong, if your daughter is truly dead—" Jonas tightened his grip on the reins. "Then nothing much changes. I go back to waiting for death. You find your way north." Grey Dove seemed to accept this answer, harsh as it was. They lapsed back into silence as the wagon continued eastward. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying with each passing hour. By mid-morning they could see dust in the distance, the first sign of Redemption's outskirts. "Remember," Jonas said as they approached, "stay close. Let me do the talking." Redemption had grown since its founding 15 years earlier. What had started as a stagecoach stop now boasted a main street with a hotel, a saloon, a general store, a small bank, and various other businesses. Side streets branched off, lined with modest homes and workshops. At the far end of town stood the new church, its white steeple the tallest structure for miles. As Jonas drove the wagon down the main street, he felt the weight of eyes upon them. People paused in their activities to stare. Women sweeping porches, men loading supplies, children playing in the dusty street. Gray Dove kept her gaze forward, her back straight, her face a mask of composure. But Jonas could sense the tension in her like a drawn bowstring. He pulled the wagon to a stop outside Webster's General Store. Frank Webster was one of the few merchants in town not under Hollister's thumb, a cantankerous old man who had once been married to a Navajo woman. If anyone would sell to them without trouble, it would be Frank. "Wait here a moment," Jonas said, climbing down from the wagon. "Let me speak to Frank first." Gray Dove nodded, her hands folded in her lap, the picture of patience. But Jonas noticed her eyes scanning the street, marking potential threats' escape routes. She had a warrior's awareness. The bell above the door jingled as Jonas entered the store. Frank Webster was behind the counter, a wiry man in his 60s with a shock of white hair and spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up, recognition dawning on his face. "Jonas Cutter," he said, setting aside the ledger he'd been working on. "Twice in 1 year. To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Need supplies, Frank," Jonas said, moving to the counter. "Flour, coffee, salt, the usual, and some milk if you've got it." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Milk, that's new." His gaze drifted to the window where Gray Dove was visible on the wagon bench. "And so is your companion." Jonas met the older man's gaze steadily. "She and her family need shelter. I'm providing it." Frank studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "About time someone did. Army's been pushing them off good hunting land onto barren rock, then wondering why they're starving." "You've heard about El Carnicero's attacks." Frank's expression darkened. "Heard hell the army was here yesterday asking questions. Seems the butcher hit a village up near Diablo Canyon. Killed all the men, took some of the women. The rest scattered." He glanced again at Gray Dove. "She one of them?" Jonas nodded. "Her grandmother, 2 others, and a baby. They came to me because the old woman once saved my life." "Decent of you to return the favor," Frank said. "Not everyone around here would." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. How's the mood in town?" Frank removed his spectacles, polishing them on his apron. "Tense. Hollister's been riling people up, talking about Apache raids and Mexican bandits threatening our way of life. He's got a militia of sorts, mostly young hotheads and old fools who think killing Indians will make them heroes." "Have they gone out looking yet?" "Not officially, but there have been riders heading out at night, coming back at dawn. No one talks about where they've been or what they've done." Frank replaced his spectacles. "Hollister's been asking about you too." Jonas tensed. "What about me?" "Wanted to know if you'd been in town, if you'd been seen with suspicious persons." I told him the only suspicious person I knew was him. Despite the gravity of the situation, Jonas felt a smile tug at his lips. Frank's defiance of Hollister was well known, and probably the only reason the mayor hadn't run him out of business yet. "I appreciate that, Frank." "Don't thank me yet," Frank replied grimly. "Bringing her into town was a risk. Hollister's boys are probably watching us right now." Jonas glanced over his shoulder at the window. Gray Dove remained on the wagon bench, her posture unchanged. But now Jonas noticed a group of men gathered outside the saloon across the street, their attention fixed on the wagon. "I need information more than supplies," Jonas said, lowering his voice. "Running Hawk, the grandmother, says she saw Lizzie alive 4 months ago near Diablo Canyon." Frank's eyes widened. "You're Lizzie? The girl you thought was killed?" Jonas nodded. She says Lizzie had joined an Apache band, was living with them willingly. Frank let out a low whistle. That would explain a lot. What do you mean? The Army's not just looking for El Carnicero. They're looking for a specific group of Apache, a mixed band, not just one tribe. Word is they've been taking in survivors from different villages, even some half-breeds and white captives who've gone native. Jonas's heart quickened. Where are they? No one knows exactly. Deep in the canyons somewhere. Army sent scouts, but they never came back. Frank leaned closer. But there's a trapper, old Ezekiel Jenkins, who trades with them sometimes. He came through here last week, drunk as a skunk, talking about a white squaw with witch powers who heals the sick. Where can I find this trapper? He has a cabin up near Bear Creek, about 20 miles northeast of here. Frank began gathering supplies as they talked, pulling flour and coffee from the shelves. But Jonas, be careful. If Hollister gets wind, you're looking for Apache. Especially with an Apache woman at your side, he'll use it as an excuse. An excuse for what? To finally take your land. Frank's gaze was steady. He's been eyeing your water rights for years. Says you're sitting on the best spring in the county and doing nothing with it. Jonas hadn't considered this angle. His spring was indeed valuable, providing clean water year-round, even in drought. It was the main reason he'd chosen that particular plot when he and Sarah had settled. I need to speak with Ezekiel, Jonas said. But first I need to get Gray Dove and these supplies back safely. Frank nodded, continuing to gather the requested items. Take the back way out of town. Less chance of running into trouble. As Frank packed the supplies into crates, the bell above the door jingled. Jonas turned to see a man enter. Sheriff Tom Blackwood, a tall figure in a dusty black coat with a silver star pinned to his chest. The sheriff's weathered face registered surprise at seeing Jonas, then settled into its usual mask of official detachment. Cutter, he said with a nod. Been a while. Sheriff. Jonas returned the greeting cautiously. He and Blackwood had an understanding of sorts, not friendship, but a mutual respect, born of shared experiences. Both had served in the Army, both had seen the ugliness that men were capable of in the name of progress. Blackwood's gaze drifted to the window, taking in Gray Dove on the wagon. Heard you might have company out at your place. Jonas stiffened. News travels fast. Small town, Blackwood replied with a shrug. Martha Wilson mentioned you needed milk for a baby. Didn't take long for people to start wondering. Am I breaking any law, Sheriff? Blackwood shook his head. Not that I know of. But Hollister's been in my office every day this week, pushing me to enforce some territorial ordinance about harboring hostiles. She's not a hostile, none of them are. They're refugees from El Carnicero's attack. The sheriff's expression remained neutral, but Jonas thought he detected a flicker of sympathy. I understand that, but Hollister doesn't care about the difference. To him, all Apache are the same. What are you saying, Tom? Blackwood sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his thinning hair. I'm saying be careful. I can't protect you if Hollister's militia decides to take matters into their own hands. I've got 2 deputies, and they're both more loyal to the mayor than to me. Jonas nodded, understanding the warning for what it was. Appreciate the heads up. There's something else, Blackwood said, his voice dropping. Army patrol came through yesterday. They're not just looking for El Carnicero. They're looking for a specific Apache girl, mixed blood, with a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. Jonas felt as if the floor had dropped from beneath him. Why, what do they want with her? Didn't say. But they're offering a reward for information leading to her capture. Dead or alive. Frank, who had been listening while packing supplies, let out a low curse. That's not Army business. That's Hollister's doing. Blackwood didn't confirm or deny this. All I know is they showed a drawing of the mark, like a half moon on the shoulder. Said anyone fitting that description should be considered dangerous. Jonas struggled to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. The Army was looking for Lizzie, or someone with the same birthmark, and they wanted her dead or alive. "Thanks for the warning," he said finally. "We'll be on our way once Frank finishes with our supplies." Blackwood replaced his hat. "Take the south road out of town. Hollister's boys tend to watch the main road east." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Cutter, whatever you're mixed up in, I hope it's worth the risk." After the sheriff left, Jonas turned to Frank. "How soon can you have those supplies ready?" "Just about finished," Frank replied, tying the last crate closed. "But Jonas, you heard the sheriff. This is bigger than just giving shelter to some refugees. If the Army's involved—" "All the more reason for me to find Lizzie first," Jonas said grimly. "If that's even who they're looking for." Frank nodded, understanding. "Take what you need. Pay me next time when things cool down." Jonas clasped the older man's shoulder in gratitude. "I won't forget this, Frank." "See that you live long enough to remember," Frank replied dryly. Outside, Jonas found Grey Dove still waiting patiently, though her eyes tracked the group of men who had moved closer to the wagon. They were Hollister's men Jonas recognized, ranch hands and shopkeepers who doubled as the mayor's enforcers. Among them stood Eli Parker, Hollister's foreman and right-hand man, a bull-necked former boxer with a reputation for brutality. "That her," Parker called loudly as Jonas approached the wagon. "That the squaw you're keeping, Cutter?" Jonas ignored him, focusing on loading the supplies into the back of the wagon. Grey Dove remained perfectly still, her eyes forward, her face expressionless. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Parker said, moving closer. "Mayor wants to know what business you got bringing Apache into town after what happened up north." Jonas straightened, fixing Parker with a cold stare. "My business is my own, Eli, and she's under my protection." Parker snorted. "Protection, that what they call it now," he leered at Grey Dove. "She's a pretty one, I'll give you that, though I wouldn't dirty myself with an Indian." Jonas felt his hands curl into fists, but before he could respond, Grey Dove spoke. "This man smells of fear," she said calmly in English, her voice carrying clearly. "Like a dog that barks because it is afraid." Parker's face flushed an ugly red. "What did you say to me, squaw?" Grey Dove's gaze met his unflinching. "I said you are a coward who hides behind words because you fear a woman who is not afraid of you." A dangerous silence fell over the street. Jonas tensed, ready for violence. Parker took a step forward, his hand drifting to the knife at his belt. "You'll regret those words, Indian," he growled. "And you'll regret drawing that knife," Jonas said, his own hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Walk away, Eli. This isn't the fight you want." For a tense moment, Parker seemed ready to ignore the warning. But a look passed between him and his companions, a silent calculation of odds and consequences. Jonas Cutter might be a recluse, but he was known to be deadly with a gun, a skill earned in the Army and honed in the years since. "Mayor Hollister will hear about this," Parker said, finally backing away. "He won't stand for Apache lovers in redemption." "Tell him whatever you want," Jonas replied. "Now clear the way. We're leaving." Parker and his men moved aside, but the threat in their eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't over, merely postponed. Jonas climbed onto the wagon bench and took the reins. Grey Dove sat beside him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes alert. Without another word, Jonas flicked the reins, and Samson began to move, pulling the wagon away from Webster's store and down the street. "South Road," Jonas murmured, guiding the mule toward a side street that would take them around the main part of town. "The fat one with the knife," Grey Dove said quietly. "He will come for us." "Yes," Jonas agreed, "but not alone, and not today." They traveled in tense silence until they had left Redemption behind the buildings, giving way to open desert once more. Only then did Jonas relax his grip on the reins. "You shouldn't have spoken to him like that," he said, though there was no real admonishment in his tone. "I spoke truth," Grey Dove replied. "Such men only understand strength." Jonas couldn't argue with her assessment. Still, it was a risk. "Life is risk," she said simply. "The day without risk is the day you are already dead." Jonas glanced at her, struck by the philosophy. It reminded him of something Sarah might have said. His wife had been a practical woman, but with an unexpected streak of wisdom that had often caught him off guard. "What did you learn?" Grey Dove asked, changing the subject. "The old one with the white hair. He knows something." Jonas hesitated, then decided on honesty. "There's a trapper who trades with a mixed band of Apache in the mountains. He mentioned a white woman living among them, one who heals the sick." Grey Dove's expression remained neutral, but Jonas sensed her interest sharpening. "The girl with the moon mark." He didn't mention a birthmark, but it's a place to start looking. "When do we go?" The question surprised Jonas. "We don't. I go alone once I've made sure you and the others are safe." Grey Dove shook her head. "No. If this is the band, I think they will kill any white man who approaches alone. You need me. It's too dangerous. For who you—" There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "I have lived with danger since I was born. You are the one who sat alone in a cabin for 5 years hiding from life." The observation stung because it contained truth. Jonas had indeed been hiding. From grief, from responsibility, from the very act of living. It had taken Running Hawk's arrival to pull him back into the world. "We'll discuss it when we return," he said, unwilling to commit further. Grey Dove seemed to accept this compromise. "The men in your town fear you," she noted. Wyman Jonas kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Because they know what I'm capable of. You were a warrior once." It wasn't a question, but Jonas answered anyway. "Yes, in the army then as a scout. I've killed men, white Mexican Apache. I'm not proud of it." "Yet you wear the skill like armor," Grey Dove observed. "You let them see it in your eyes." Jonas had never thought of it that way, but she was right. His reputation for deadliness was a shield he maintained, a barrier that kept others at a distance. "What about you?" he asked, turning the conversation. "Were you a warrior too, before all this?" Grey Dove touched the leather pouch that hung from her neck. "I was to be medicine woman, like my mother before me. But when the soldiers came to force us onto the reservation, I learned to fight instead." "And the others?" Silent Rain Willow. "Rain is a healer, the best of our band." "Willow?" Grey Dove's expression softened slightly. "Willow was to marry my brother's son. The baby she carries is the last of his bloodline." Jonas absorbed this information, these fragments of lives interrupted by violence and displacement. "And the baby, Morning Star, the chief's daughter. Born as we fled. Her mother died bringing her into the world." The parallels to his own life, to Sarah's death in childbirth, were not lost on Jonas. He fell silent, considering the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment, sitting beside an Apache woman on a wagon loaded with supplies, returning to a home that now sheltered the very people he had spent years blaming for his losses. They were about halfway back to the homestead when Grey Dove suddenly stiffened her hand, going to Jonas's arm. "Stop!" she said, her voice low with urgency. Jonas pulled back on the reins, bringing Samson to a halt. "What is it?" Grey Dove was scanning the landscape, her eyes narrowed. "Riders! There!" She pointed to a rise about half a mile to the north, where dust betrayed movement. Jonas followed her gaze, squinting against the afternoon sun. He could make out at least 3 horsemen, maybe more, moving parallel to their route. "Could be just travelers," he said, but without conviction. "They follow us," Grey Dove said with certainty. "Since we left town." Jonas weighed their options. The wagon was slow exposed. If those riders meant them harm, there was no outrunning them. "We keep going," he decided, "but ready for trouble." Grey Dove nodded her hand, moving to her hidden knife. Jonas flicked the reins, setting Samson in motion again, but his own hand rested near his revolver. The homestead was still more than an hour away at their current pace. A lot could happen in an hour. The riders maintained their distance for the next several miles, never approaching, but never falling behind either. Their presence was a constant reminder of threat, a shadow over the journey home. "If they attack," Grey Dove said quietly, "do not try to save me. Get back to the others. Warn them." Jonas glanced at her, surprised by the selflessness of the request. "We'll both get back," he said. "I didn't bring you to town just to abandon you on the way home." A ghost of a smile touched Grey Dove's lips. "You are strange for a white man." "So I've been told." The riders finally fell back as Jonas's homestead came into view, disappearing over a rise to the north. Jonas didn't believe for a moment they were gone for good. More likely, they were reporting back to whoever had sent them. Hollister, probably, or perhaps someone even more dangerous. The cabin door opened as they approached Running Hawk, emerging with Morning Star in her arms. Silent Rain and Willow followed, relief evident on their faces. They had been watching, waiting, perhaps wondering if the trip to town would end in betrayal after all. "You're late," Running Hawk said as Jonas brought the wagon to a stop in the yard. "We were concerned." "We had company on the road," Jonas replied, climbing down. "Riders watching us." Running Hawk's expression remained calm, but her eyes sharpened. "Hollister's men, most likely." Jonas began unloading the supplies. "We need to be ready. They know you're here now." Grey Dove jumped down from the wagon and went to Willow, speaking rapidly in Apache. Jonas caught the name El Carnicero amid the flow of words and saw Willow's hand move protectively to her swollen belly. Silent Rain approached Jonas, her quiet presence a contrast to Grey Dove's intensity. "You found news of the girl with the moon mark?" she asked softly. Jonas nodded. "Maybe. There's a trapper who trades with a mixed band in the mountains. He spoke of a white woman living among them, one who heals." Silent Rain's eyes widened slightly. "This is good news. When do we go to find her?" Jonas was struck by the same assumption Grey Dove had made, that this would be a group endeavor rather than his solo mission. "It's not safe," he said, "especially not for Willow in her condition, or the baby." "Safety is an illusion," Running Hawk said, joining them. "We have survived this long by moving, not by hiding." Jonas couldn't argue with their logic, but the thought of leading 4 women and an infant into the mountains with both Hollister's men and El Carnicero potentially hunting them filled him with dread. "Let me think on it," he said finally. "There's someone else I need to speak with first, the trapper who saw this woman. He might know more about where to find her and whether she's really Lizzie." Running Hawk studied him with those obsidian eyes that seemed to see too much. "You fear hope," she said. "You have lived so long with grief that hope feels like a betrayal." The observation was so accurate it left Jonas momentarily speechless. He had indeed come to see hope as a kind of betrayal of Sarah's memory of his own carefully constructed emptiness. "I just want to be sure before we risk everyone's lives," he said finally. Running Hawk nodded, accepting his reasoning, even if she saw through it. "Tonight we will eat. Tomorrow we will decide." The evening meal was simple but nourishing. Beans, cornbread made from the flour they'd purchased, coffee for Jonas and the women. They ate inside the cabin, gathered around Jonas's table, in a domestic scene that would have been unthinkable a week ago. Silent Rain had prepared a poultice for Jonas's old wound, and after dinner she insisted on applying it. Jonas sat uncomfortably as she gently pressed the herb-infused cloth to his side, her touch clinical but kind. "The arrow went deep," she observed, examining the scarred tissue. "You are fortunate it did not find your heart." "Wasn't luck," Jonas said. "Running Hawk turned me just as the warrior fired. The arrow meant for my chest found my side instead." Silent Rain's gaze met his briefly. "Then you owe her more than one life." Jonas couldn't disagree. The debt he owed Running Hawk was deeper than he had acknowledged even to himself. Without her intervention 16 years ago, he would never have met Sarah, never have found Lizzie, never have experienced the brief happiness that made his current existence so empty by comparison. Outside, the night had deepened, stars pricking the vast desert sky. Jonas stepped onto the porch after Silent Rain had finished with the poultice, needing a moment alone to process the day's events. Gray Dove followed him, silent as her name. "They will come," she said, taking up position beside him at the porch railing. "Maybe not tonight, but soon." "I know," Jonas replied. "We should not be here when they do." Jonas turned to look at her. "What are you suggesting? We leave tomorrow, all of us, find the trapper, then the band in the mountains." "Willow can barely walk. The baby needs constant care." Gray Dove's expression hardened. "And they will die here if we stay. You know this." Jonas did know it, had known it since their confrontation with Parker in town. Hollister would never allow Apache to settle in the area, especially not on land he coveted. And if El Carnicero was truly hunting for a child with the moon mark, it was only a matter of time before he expanded his search to include Jonas's homestead. Where would we go? He asked the question itself, an admission that she was right. North first to find the trapper, then east into the mountains where the mixed band makes camp. Gray Dove's confidence suggested she knew more than she had revealed. "My father's cousin joined them after his village was destroyed. If he lives, he will vouch for us." "That's a lot of ifs," Jonas pointed out. Gray Dove turned to face him fully, her expression grave in the starlight. "Life is ifs, white man. The only certainty is what stands before you in this moment." She gestured toward the cabin where the others were preparing for sleep. "They trust you because Running Hawk says you are honorable. I do not know if she is right, but I know staying here means death." Jonas looked out at his land, the small garden, the corral, the 2 graves on the hillside. For 5 years this place had been his refuge and his prison. The thought of leaving it stirred a strange mixture of fear and relief within him. "At first light," he said finally, "we'll pack what we can carry and go north." Gray Dove nodded satisfaction in the set of her shoulders. "You choose life, then?" "For now," Jonas replied. "No promises beyond finding the trapper and learning what he knows." "No promises needed," she said. "The path reveals itself to those who walk it." They stood in silence for a moment longer, the night settling around them like a blanket. Then a sound broke the stillness, a high, thin cry from inside the cabin. Morning Star awakening, hungry or uncomfortable. "You should rest," Gray Dove said, moving toward the door. "Tomorrow will test us all." Jonas remained on the porch after she had gone inside, his gaze drawn inexorably to the two graves on the hillside. If he left tomorrow, it might be the last time he stood before them, the last time he spoke to Sarah in the silent communion of grief. And if Running Hawk was right, if Lizzie still lived, what then? What would it mean to discover that one of those graves had been empty all along? The questions circled in his mind like carrion birds offering no answers, only the promise of more uncertainty. Jonas fingered the poultice at his side, feeling the strange warmth of Silent Rain's medicine working into his old wound. The physical pain was easing, but the deeper ache, the one that had driven him to press a gun to his temple a week ago, remained unresolved. Gray Dove was right about one thing: staying meant death either at Hollister's hands or by Jonas's own when the emptiness finally became unbearable. Leaving at least offered the possibility of something else, even if that something else was only a different kind of end. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered to the night. "I have to know." In the distance, a coyote called its lonely howl echoing across the desert. Another answered, and another, until a chorus of wild voices filled the darkness. To most settlers, the sound was threatening, a reminder of nature's indifference to human concerns. But to Jonas, standing on the threshold between his past and an uncertain future, it sounded almost like approval. Tomorrow, they would leave. Tomorrow, he would begin the journey toward a truth he both craved and feared. Tomorrow, for the first time in 5 years, Jonas Cutter would step beyond the boundaries of his grief and into the wider world. He didn't know if he was ready. He didn't know if any of them would survive what lay ahead. But as he turned to go back inside, he felt something stir within him. A sensation so foreign, he almost didn't recognize it. It was purpose. And behind it, shadowing its edges like dawn light through storm clouds, the faintest glimmer of hope. Dawn came with the swift certainty of the desert darkness giving way to light, without the gradual transition known in gentler climates. Jonas was already awake, had been for hours gathering what they would need for the journey ahead. The wagon was too slow, too obvious a target. They would travel by horseback instead. Jonas on his gelding, the women sharing the mare and the mule. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option available. The cabin, his home for 15 years, looked strange to him now, as if the decision to leave had already transformed it from sanctuary to memory. Jonas moved through the rooms with an odd detachment, selecting what to take, what to leave behind. The essentials were easy: food, water, weapons, blankets. The rest required more difficult choices. He stood before the mantel, staring at Sarah's daguerreotype, the familiar pang in his chest, both comforting and painful. To leave it behind felt like abandonment, but to take it risked damage or loss on the difficult journey ahead. "She goes with you, whether you carry her image or not," Running Hawk said from the doorway, startling him. The old woman moved with a silence that belied her age. Jonas took the picture from the mantel, carefully wrapping it in a cloth, before placing it in his saddlebag. "Some things aren't meant to be left behind," he said. Running Hawk nodded understanding in her weathered face. "The dead travel with us always. Their weight is what shapes our path." Outside, Gray Dove was readying the horses, checking cinches and straps with practiced efficiency. Silent Rain sat nearby, grinding herbs and placing them in small leather pouches, medicines for the journey. Willow, her pregnancy now visibly advanced, sorted through their meager food supplies, dividing them into equal portions. Jonas approached Gray Dove as she adjusted the bridle on his gelding. "We'll need to travel light. Move fast," he said. "Are they ready?" Gray Dove's expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. "Willow's time is near." The ride will be hard on her. I know, but staying is harder. She nodded, accepting this truth. We are Apache. Hardship has been our companion longer than any horse or weapon. Jonas checked his rifle, ensuring it was clean and loaded, then secured it to his saddle. His revolver hung at his hip, a comfort born of long habit. He had added a second pistol to his saddlebags, along with extra ammunition. If trouble found them, and he had no doubt it would, he intended to be prepared. As the sun crested the eastern hills, bathing the desert in golden light, they were ready to depart. Jonas took one last look at the cabin, at the garden Sarah had planted, at the 2 graves on the hillside. 5 years of grief concentrated in this small patch of earth. 5 years of waiting to die. Running Hawk approached Morning Star, bundled securely against her chest. "You will return," she said, not a question, but a statement. "Maybe," Jonas replied. "If we survive what's coming. If the girl with the moon mark lives, you will bring her home." Home. The word carried a weight Jonas wasn't ready to examine. Was this still home? Would it ever be again? He helped Willow onto the mare, her movements awkward with the child she carried. Silent Rain mounted behind her, one arm supporting Willow's back. Gray Dove and Running Hawk, with the baby, would share the mule. An undignified arrangement, but Running Hawk had waved off his concerns with the pragmatism of one who had survived far worse indignities. Jonas swung into his own saddle, settling his weight, as the gelding pranced beneath him, eager to move after days in the corral. "We head north first," he said, "to Bear Creek. If the trapper is there, we should reach his cabin by nightfall." "And if Hollister's men follow," Gray Dove asked, her hand resting near the knife at her belt. "Then we deal with them," Jonas replied, the simplicity of his answer belying the gravity of its implications. He had not killed a man in 5 years, had thought those days behind him. Now he was prepared to do so again, if necessary, to protect these women who had, in the space of a week, become his responsibility. With a final glance at the homestead, Jonas turned his horse northward, leading their small procession away from the only security they had known. Behind them, the cabin stood silent in the morning light, its emptiness a promise or a warning, depending on one's perspective. They traveled steadily through the morning hours, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads where they might be seen. Jonas set a pace that was demanding, but not punishing, mindful of Willow's condition and the baby's needs. Still, he pushed them harder than he might have otherwise, aware that each passing hour increased the likelihood of pursuit. By midday, they had covered nearly 15 miles of rough country, the landscape changing from scrubland to rockier terrain as they moved north toward the foothills. They stopped to rest in the shadow of a sandstone outcropping, the horses grazing on the sparse vegetation, while the humans shared jerky and water. "How much farther to this trapper's cabin?" Running Hawk asked, adjusting Morning Star at her breast. The baby had been remarkably quiet throughout the journey, as if sensing the need for stealth. "Another 10 miles or so," Jonas replied, "but the terrain gets harder from here. We'll need to cross Rattlesnake Ridge before descending into Bear Creek Canyon." Silent Rain, who had been tending to Willow, looked up with concern. "Willow's pains have started. Not labor yet, but the child is restless." Jonas felt a flicker of alarm. A birth on the trail with Hollister's men potentially in pursuit, and the threat of El Carnicero looming, would be disastrous. "Can she continue?" Silent Rain exchanged words with Willow in Apache, then nodded. "For now, but we must reach shelter by nightfall. She cannot birth a child under open sky with enemies nearby." The stakes of their journey had just risen considerably. Jonas scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of pursuit, but saw only the empty expanse of desert, and the distant shimmer of mountains. That didn't mean they weren't being followed, only that their pursuers were skilled enough to remain hidden. "We leave in 10 minutes," he decided. "The sooner we reach the trapper's cabin, the better." Gray Dove, who had been keeping watch from atop the outcropping, slid down to join them. "Dust to the south," she reported. "Riders moving fast. At least 4, maybe more." Jonas cursed under his breath. Hollister's men. They must have found the cabin empty at dawn. "They will catch us before the ridge," Gray Dove said, her voice matter-of-fact rather than fearful. Jonas weighed their options quickly. Confrontation was inevitable. The question was when and where it would occur. Better to choose the ground than have it forced upon them. "There's a narrow pass about 3 miles ahead," he said. "Red rock walls on both sides, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. If we can reach it before they catch us, I can hold them off while you continue to the trappers." Gray Dove's expression hardened. "You would face them alone. One man in a defensible position can hold off many, at least for a time," Jonas replied. "You need to get Willow to safety." Running Hawk's obsidian eyes studied him. "You offer your life for ours." Jonas met her gaze steadily. "I'm offering a chance. For all of us." After a moment's consideration, Running Hawk nodded. "We accept your plan, but Gray Dove stays with you. 2 guns are better than 1. Gray Dove didn't wait for Jonas to protest, simply moved to gather her few belongings and check the knife at her belt. Her readiness to face danger alongside him was both admirable and unsettling, a reminder that she was a warrior in her own right, not merely a woman in need of protection. They mounted quickly, abandoning the rest break earlier than planned. Jonas led them at a faster pace, now pushing the horses as much as he dared. Willow grimaced with discomfort, but made no complaint. One hand resting protectively on her swollen belly as silent rain steadied her from behind. The dust cloud to the south grew larger as they rode, confirming Gray Dove's assessment that the pursuers were gaining ground. Jonas estimated they had perhaps an hour before they would be overtaken, unless they reached the pass first. The terrain grew increasingly rugged scrub, giving way to scattered boulders and dry washes that forced them to pick their way carefully. Jonas knew these lands well from his scouting days, had traversed them many times in search of Apache bands or Mexican raiders. Now that knowledge served a different purpose as he led his unlikely companions toward their best hope of survival. The pass came into view just as they heard the first distant shouts behind them. Hollister's men close enough now to have spotted their quarry. Jonas gestured urgently for the women to ride ahead, while he and Gray Dove fell back, preparing to make their stand. "Once you're through," Jonas instructed Running Hawk, "follow the creek bed north. The trapper's cabin is built against a cliff face about 5 miles up. Tell him Jonas Cutter sent you. He owes me a favor." Running Hawk's expression was solemn. "We will await you there. If we don't come by morning, keep going east to find the mixed band." The old woman nodded once, understanding the reality that this might be their final parting. "May your aim be true, Jonas Cutter." As Running Hawk, Silent Rain, and Willow continued toward the pass, Jonas and Gray Dove took up positions among the rocks near its entrance. The natural formation created a bottleneck that would force their pursuers to approach in single file, or at most 2 abreast, negating their numerical advantage. Gray Dove drew a small bow from her pack, along with a handful of arrows. Jonas raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You didn't mention you had that." "You didn't ask," she replied, testing the bowstring with practiced ease. Jonas positioned his rifle on a rock, sighting down the barrel toward the approaching riders. He could make out 6 men now, led by Eli Parker, Hollister's enforcer. They were riding hard, confident in their pursuit, apparently unaware of the ambush ahead. "Remember," Jonas said quietly. "We're not trying to kill them all. Just hold them back long enough for the others to reach the cabin." Grey Dove knocked an arrow. "I will aim for the horses first. Men without mounts are men who cannot chase." Jonas nodded his approval of the strategy. "I'll take the leader. Without Parker, the rest might lose their nerve." The riders drew closer, dust billowing behind them as they urged their horses forward. They were close enough now that Jonas could see Parker's face contorted with the effort of the chase and the anticipation of capture. "Wait for my shot," Jonas murmured, steadying his breathing as he had been taught long ago. The rifle's familiar weight against his shoulder was both comfort and burden, a reminder of the man he had once been, the killer he had thought left behind. Parker and his men were now within range, perhaps 200 yards, and closing fast. Jonas exhaled slowly, centered the leader in his sights, and squeezed the trigger. The report echoed off the canyon walls startlingly loud in the afternoon quiet. Parker's horse reared as a plume of dust erupted directly in front of its hooves, a warning shot deliberately placed. The pursuers reined in, sharply confusion, replacing confidence as they scanned the rocks for the source of the shot. Jonas remained perfectly still, knowing that movement would give away his position. "Cutter!" Parker shouted, his voice carrying across the distance. "We know it's you! Come out and face us like a man!" Jonas didn't respond, merely worked the lever of his rifle to chamber another round. Beside him, Grey Dove held her arrow at full draw, waiting for his signal. Parker turned to his men, gesturing angrily. Two of them dismounted, drawing rifles from their saddle scabbards. They began to advance on foot, using the scattered boulders for cover. "Now," Jonas whispered. Grey Dove's arrow flew with deadly accuracy, striking the ground directly between the advancing men. Before they could react, Jonas fired again, this time putting a bullet through the hat of one of the riders still mounted. The message was clear. The next shots would not be warnings. Parker and his men fell back, seeking cover among the rocks, as they realized the disadvantage of their position. For several tense minutes no one moved. The only sounds, the nervous shifting of horses and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. "Cutter!" Parker called again. "Hollister just wants the Indians. Give them up, and you can ride away free." "That's not going to happen, Eli," Jonas replied, breaking his silence. "Tell Hollister to go back to town and leave us be. This doesn't have to end in blood." Parker's laugh was ugly. "It's already ended, you just don't know it yet. Army patrols are sweeping the territory. There's nowhere for you and your squaws to hide." Jonas exchanged a glance with Grey Dove, whose expression remained impassive despite the threat. "We're not looking to hide," he called back. "We're looking for someone. Once we find her, we'll be on our way out of the territory." "The girl with the moon mark," Parker said, his voice carrying a note of triumph that sent a chill down Jonas's spine. "That's who you're after, isn't it? The witch girl." Jonas felt as if he'd been struck. How could Parker know about Lizzie's birthmark? "What do you know about her?" he demanded. "Enough to know she's worth a lot to the right people," Parker replied. "Army's offering $200 for her, dead or alive. Hollister's offering $500. And El Carnicero, he's offering 1,000 in gold." Grey Dove's fingers tightened on her bow. "He lies to make you hesitate," she whispered. "Do not listen." But Jonas couldn't dismiss Parker's words so easily. The mention of specific rewards suggested knowledge, not mere taunting. "What?" he called. "Why does everyone want this girl?" "You mean you don't know?" Parker's voice dripped with mock surprise. "Your own daughter, and you don't know what she is." Jonas's blood ran cold. Parker knew. Somehow he knew that the girl with the moon mark was Lizzie. "She's special, Cutter," Parker continued, his voice taking on an almost reverent quality that was more disturbing than his earlier threats. She has the sight. She can see things before they happen. People say she's healed the dying with just a touch. Gray Dove hissed something in Apache that Jonas didn't understand, but the tension in her body spoke volumes. "He speaks of the one from the prophecy," she said in English, "the child of two bloods who would lead our people to safety." Jonas had dismissed Running Hawk's mention of a prophecy as superstition, but Parker's words gave him pause. If others believed Lizzie had special powers, it would explain the fervor with which she was being hunted. "Enough talk, Eli," Jonas called, refocusing on the immediate threat. "Take your men and go back to Redemption. Tell Hollister he can have my land. I won't be coming back for it. Just leave us be." Parker's response was a rifle shot that splintered rock inches from Jonas's head. The battle had begun. For the next half-hour, gunfire echoed through the canyon as Parker and his men attempted to advance, and were driven back by Jonas's accurate shooting and Gray Dove's deadly arrows. Two of Parker's men were wounded, not fatally, but enough to take them out of the fight. Another had his horse shot out from under him by Gray Dove, forcing him to withdraw to safer ground. Jonas was careful with his ammunition, making each shot count. He had no desire to kill these men, former neighbors, even if not friends. But he wouldn't hesitate if it came to a choice between their lives and the safety of his companions. "They're pulling back," Gray Dove observed as the gunfire from Parker's position slackened. Jonas nodded, watching as the pursuers gathered their wounded and began to retreat. "They'll go for reinforcements. We've bought some time, but not much." "Then we should go now," Gray Dove said, already gathering her arrows. "The others will have reached the creek by now." Jonas took one last look at the retreating men, committing their positions to memory in case they attempted an ambush, then followed Gray Dove as she made her way through the rocks toward their tethered horses. They mounted quickly and rode through the pass, pushing their horses to a gallop once they reached the wider canyon beyond. The shadows were lengthening as afternoon gave way to evening, the temperature dropping with the sun's descent. They caught up with the others at the creek, where they had stopped to rest the horses and attend to Willow, whose discomfort had visibly increased. "We heard the shooting," Running Hawk said as they approached. "We feared you would not follow." "Parker and his men will be back with reinforcements," Jonas replied grimly. "We need to reach the trapper's cabin before nightfall." Silent Rain looked up from where she knelt beside Willow. "Her time is very near. The ride has hastened the child's coming." Jonas cursed their luck. A woman in labor would slow them further, making them vulnerable to pursuit. But there was no help for it. They couldn't leave Willow behind. "Can she ride a little longer?" he asked. Silent Rain conferred briefly with Willow, who nodded despite the pain evident in her face. "She is strong," Silent Rain said, "but we must hurry." They helped Willow back onto the mare, with Silent Rain behind her for support. Jonas led them northward along the creek, keeping to the tree line where the vegetation would provide some cover from searching eyes. The trapper's cabin came into view just as the last light faded from the sky. It was a crude structure built against a cliff face with a stone chimney and a small corral for animals. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating the trapper was home. A small mercy in a day that had offered few. Jonas approached first, calling out, before he reached the door. "Ezekiel, it's Jonas Cutter." The cabin door creaked open, revealing a bearded man with a face weathered by years in the wilderness. He held a shotgun casually in one hand, neither threatening nor entirely welcoming. "Cutter," he said, recognition dawning in his rheumy eyes. "Been a spell since you darkened my door." His gaze drifted to the women waiting a short distance away, and his bushy eyebrows rose. Brought company, I see. We need shelter, Jonas said without preamble. One of the women is about to give birth. We're being pursued. Ezekiel Jenkins had lived on the frontier long enough to recognize trouble when it arrived on his doorstep. But he had also lived long enough to know that turning away those in need often brought its own form of retribution. "Hollister's boys?" he asked. Jonas nodded. "They're not far behind." Ezekiel spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Never did like that puffed-up shopkeeper." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the cabin door. "Bring 'em in. Ain't much room, but it's warm, and the roof don't leak." Relief washed over Jonas. "We won't forget this, Ezekiel." The trapper waved away his gratitude. "You saved my worthless hide from Apaches once. Reckon I owe you this much, even if you're riding with 'em now." The cabin's interior was cramped but clean, with a stone fireplace providing warmth and light. A rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot constituted the furnishings. Pelts hung from the walls and dried herbs dangled from the rafters, the tools of Ezekiel's trade. They settled Willow on the cot, where Silent Rain immediately began preparations for the birth. Running Hawk found a corner to tend to Morning Star, while Gray Dove positioned herself near the window, keeping watch for signs of pursuit. "You picked a hell of a time to take up with Apaches," Ezekiel remarked to Jonas as he put coffee on to boil. "Whole territories in an uproar. Armies offering rewards for certain tribes, Hollister's got his militia out hunting, and that Mexican butcher's been hitting villages all along the border." "We didn't have much choice," Jonas replied, accepting a cup of the trapper's potent coffee. "They came to me for help. I owed the old one a debt." Ezekiel nodded sagely. "Debts have a way of finding us, don't they, no matter how far we run?" He studied Jonas over the rim of his cup. "But that ain't the whole story, is it? Word is you're looking for something. Or someone." Jonas hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My daughter, Lizzie. She was taken 5 years ago when my wife was killed. I thought she was dead, but now—" He glanced at Running Hawk, who was watching their conversation while soothing the baby. "Now I think she might be alive, living with a mixed band of Apaches somewhere in the mountains." Ezekiel's expression grew serious. "The white squaw, with the healing touch." Jonas felt his heart skip a beat. "You've seen her traded with her," Ezekiel confirmed. "Girl of about 16 with eyes that look right through you. Got a mark like a half moon on her shoulder." He tapped his own right shoulder to demonstrate. "She's highly regarded among the band. Some call her a witch, but with respect, not fear." Jonas struggled to keep his emotions in check. After 5 years of grief of believing Lizzie dead, or worse, to have confirmation of her survival, was overwhelming. "Where?" he asked, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. "Where can I find this band?" Ezekiel glanced at the Apache women, then back to Jonas. "It ain't an easy journey, especially with women and babes in tow. The band moves regular, staying ahead of the army and hostile tribes. But they've been wintering in a hidden valley east of Devil's Backbone, 3 days' ride from here if you know the way." "You could guide us," Jonas suggested. Ezekiel shook his head firmly. "I've lived this long by knowing when to stay clear of other folks' troubles. I'll draw you a map, give you what supplies I can spare, but that's all." Before Jonas could press further, a cry from Willow drew their attention. Her labor had begun in earnest. Silent Rain, kneeling beside the cot, murmuring encouragement in Apache. "Birth and death," Ezekiel muttered, "always seem to travel together out here." The hours that followed were tense with anticipation. For the birth, for signs of pursuit, for the dawn that would bring new decisions and dangers. Willow labored through the night, her cries muffled against a cloth as Silent Rain and Running Hawk attended her. Jonas and Grey Dove took turns keeping watch alert for any indication that Parker and his men had picked up their trail. Ezekiel busied himself preparing supplies for their journey: pemmican, jerky, dried beans, and coffee, along with extra ammunition for Jonas's rifle. He also produced a detailed map drawn on a piece of deer skin showing the route to the valley where the mixed band made their winter camp. "You'll need to cross Devil's Backbone," he explained, tracing a finger along a jagged line representing a mountain ridge. "Dangerous in the best of times, deadly if a storm hits. But it's the only way to the valley that the army don't regularly patrol." Jonas studied the map, committing it to memory. "And you're certain Lizzie, the girl with the moon mark, is with them?" "Was with them when I traded there last month," Ezekiel affirmed. "But these are uncertain times. The band's been split before when pressed by the army or rival tribes." A particularly sharp cry from Willow punctuated their conversation, followed by Silent Rain's urgent instructions in Apache. The birth was progressing quickly now. "Go to her," Ezekiel said to Jonas. "I'll keep watch for a spell." Jonas moved to the cot where Willow lay, her face sheened with sweat, her eyes wide with pain and determination. Running Hawk held her hand, while Silent Rain positioned herself to receive the child. Grey Dove stood nearby, her expression a mixture of concern and pride. "The baby comes," Silent Rain announced. "Soon now." Jonas felt out of place in this most feminine of spaces, but something held him there, a sense of responsibility perhaps, or the simple human connection to life's most fundamental moment. He had not been present when Sarah went into labor with their stillborn child, had returned home only to find both wife and infant gone. The memory of that loss made this impending birth all the more poignant. With a final powerful effort, Willow brought her child into the world, a boy, small, but with healthy lungs that announced his arrival with a robust cry. Silent Rain cleaned him, quickly wrapped him in a soft deerskin, and placed him in his mother's arms. "He is strong." Running Hawk observed her weathered face softening as she gazed at the newborn. "He will carry his father's spirit." Willow, exhausted but radiant, murmured words in Apache that Jonas couldn't understand. But their meaning was clear enough: gratitude, relief, and the fierce love of a mother for her child. The moment was broken by Ezekiel's urgent whisper from the window. "Riders, coming up from the south." Jonas moved quickly to join him, peering through the small opening. In the moonlight, he could make out a group of horsemen approaching along the creek, at least a dozen moving with purpose. "Hollister's men?" Ezekiel asked. Jonas shook his head, a cold dread settling in his stomach. "No. Look at how they ride. Low in the saddle, close formation. Those aren't townsmen." Grey Dove appeared at his shoulder, her sharp eyes narrowing as she studied the approaching riders. "El Carnicero," she said, the name itself a curse on her lips. "He has found us." The butcher had come for his prey, drawn perhaps by the same rumors that had led Jonas to seek the girl with the moon mark. But unlike Jonas, El Carnicero had no interest in reunion or redemption. He sought power or wealth or both, and he was willing to kill anyone who stood in his way. "How many guns do you have?" Jonas asked Ezekiel urgently. "Shotgun rifle, 2 revolvers," the trapper replied, "and enough ammunition to make a stand if that's what you're thinking." Jonas glanced back at the women. Willow, with her newborn Silent Rain still tending to her Running Hawk, with Morning Star in her arms, Grey Dove, ready to fight, but outnumbered and outgunned. A stand here would end only one way. "Is there another way out?" he asked. "A back trail, something they wouldn't know about." Ezekiel hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "There's a cave system behind the cabin connects to a ravine that leads up to the ridge. It's tight in places, but passable. I use it when I don't want visitors knowing my comings and goings. We need to move, Jonas decided. Now, before they surround the cabin. Grey Dove was already gathering their meager belongings, her movements swift and silent. "What of Willow and the baby?" she asked. "She cannot run." Jonas looked to Silent Rain, whose hands were still bloodied from the birth. "Can she be moved?" "It is dangerous," Silent Rain replied, "but death waits if we stay." The decision made, they worked quickly to prepare. Ezekiel gathered essential supplies, while Jonas and Grey Dove readied the women for travel. Willow, pale but determined, clutched her newborn to her breast, as Silent Rain helped her to her feet. "I'll hold them off," Ezekiel said, checking his shotgun. "Give you time to get clear." "You don't owe us that," Jonas protested. The trapper's weathered face creased in a grim smile. "Maybe not, but I've lived too long to die without purpose. Might as well make my last stand count for something." Before Jonas could argue further, Running Hawk approached Ezekiel, her obsidian eyes meeting his faded blue ones. "We will remember your name," she said solemnly. "It will be spoken around fires for generations to come." Ezekiel nodded, accepting the honor with the gravity it deserved. "Get going. Cave entrance is behind the woodpile. Follow the left passage all the way up. It comes out near the start of Devil's Backbone." Jonas clasped the trapper's shoulder in a final gesture of gratitude, then led the women toward the back of the cabin. As they slipped into the darkness of the cave, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, El Carnicero's men closing in on the cabin, that now sheltered only one defiant old man. The cave was damp and narrow, forcing them to move in single file through passages that sometimes required them to turn sideways or crawl on hands and knees. Jonas led the way, a small lantern casting just enough light to avoid pitfalls. Grey Dove came last, helping Willow navigate the difficult terrain while cradling her newborn son. They had gone perhaps a quarter-mile into the mountain when the sound of gunfire echoed through the stone corridors, Ezekiel making his stand. The shots came in clusters, the crack of the rifle interspersed with the deeper boom of the shotgun. Then, after a final volley, silence fell. Jonas paused a moment of respect for the trapper's sacrifice. Running Hawk murmured words in Apache that might have been a prayer, while Silent Rain made a gesture across her chest that seemed half blessing, half warding. "We must keep moving," Grey Dove urged, glancing back down the dark passage. "They will find the cave entrance soon." Jonas nodded, pushing aside grief to focus on survival. "Stay close. The passages split ahead." They continued their laborious journey through the mountain's heart, the cave system a maze of twisting corridors and sudden drops. Twice they were forced to backtrack when passages ended in sheer walls or chasms too wide to cross. The air grew thinner as they ascended, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Willow stumbled once, nearly falling, her strength ebbing after the ordeal of childbirth. Silent Rain caught her supporting her weight, while Grey Dove took the baby. The infant remarkably made little sound, as if he too understood the need for stealth. Finally, after what seemed hours but might have been less, Jonas detected a change in the air, a freshness that suggested they were nearing an exit. The passage widened, then opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. Above them towered the jagged peaks of Devil's Backbone, silhouetted against the starry sky. "We made it!" Jonas breathed relief, momentarily overwhelming caution. "But to where?" Grey Dove asked, scanning their surroundings with wary eyes. "We have no horses, no water, except what we carry. Willow can barely stand." It was true. They had escaped immediate danger only to face a more insidious threat, the harsh wilderness of Arizona's mountains, with winter approaching, and a newborn to protect. We follow the ridge eastward, Jonas decided, recalling Ezekiel's map. There's a pass about 5 miles along that leads down to a sheltered valley. We can rest there, decide our next move. Running Hawk, who had been silent since Ezekiel's last stand, spoke up. The mixed band will be 2 days' journey beyond the pass. If we can reach them, we will find safety. And answers, Jonas added, thinking of Lizzie, the girl with the healing touch, the one from the prophecy, his daughter, who had somehow survived and thrived among the people he had once considered enemies. As dawn broke over the eastern peaks, casting long shadows across the ravine, they began their journey along the precarious ridge. El Carnicero's men would not be far behind, Jonas knew. The butcher was not a man to abandon a hunt easily, especially not one that promised such valuable prey. But for now, they had a direction, a destination, and a slender thread of hope. Jonas looked at his unlikely companions, the old woman with her unwavering conviction, the quiet healer with her gentle hands, the new mother with her determination to see her child safe, the fierce warrior with her readiness to fight. And the 2 infants, Morning Star and Willow's unnamed son, the future of a people pushed to the edge of existence. He had started this journey seeking his own daughter, driven by a selfish need to know if she lived. Now somehow, his fate had become intertwined with theirs, his quest for Lizzie, inseparable from their struggle for survival. As they picked their way carefully along the ridge, the sun climbing higher in the eastern sky, Jonas felt something unfamiliar stirring within him. Not just hope, but purpose. For 5 years he had existed, rather than lived, waiting for death to claim him. Now surrounded by those who fought so fiercely for life, he found himself unwilling to surrender to despair. "We will find her," Grey Dove said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "The girl with the moon mark. Your daughter." Jonas glanced at her, surprised by the certainty in her voice. "How can you be so sure?" Grey Dove's expression remained stoic, but her eyes held an unexpected warmth. "Because the prophecy says the child of 2 bloods will lead us to safety in our darkest hour." She gestured to the group, making its slow way along the ridge. "What could be darker than this? If she lives, we will find her. It is written in the stars." Jonas had never been one for prophecies or mysticism. But in that moment, high on Devil's Backbone with danger behind and uncertainty ahead, he found himself willing to believe in possibilities he would once have dismissed. They continued eastward, their pace slow but steady, each step carrying them closer to the hidden valley where perhaps Lizzie awaited. And with each step, the distant thunder of hoofbeats grew louder. El Carnicero's men, relentless in their pursuit, determined that no one would reach the girl with the moon mark before their master. The race had begun. A race against time, against the elements, against a ruthless enemy who would stop at nothing to claim his prize. Jonas checked his rifle, counting the remaining ammunition. If it came to a fight, and he had no doubt it would, he would need every bullet, every advantage, every ounce of the skill that had once made him the Army's most effective scout. As they rounded a bend in the ridge, the eastern valley came into view. A vast expanse of pine forest and meadow, sheltered by towering cliffs. Somewhere in that wilderness, if Ezekiel's information was correct, lay the winter camp of the mixed band. Somewhere in that wilderness, Lizzie was waiting. "We need to find cover," Jonas said, eyeing the darkening sky to the west. "Storm's coming in. If it catches us on this ridge, we won't survive the night." Grey Dove pointed to a cluster of boulders about half a mile ahead. "There, We can shelter until the storm passes." They had just reached the boulders when the first riders appeared on the ridge behind them. El Carnicero's vanguard moving with the confidence of predators who know their prey is weakening. Jonas counted 6 men, all armed, all mounted on strong horses. The main force would not be far behind. "Get under cover," he instructed the women, helping Willow into the shelter of the largest boulder. "Gray Dove, can you still draw a bow?" She nodded, already nocking an arrow. "Until my last breath." Jonas positioned himself behind a smaller boulder rifle, ready as the riders drew closer. The wind was rising now, carrying the first icy flakes of snow, harbingers of the storm that would soon engulf the ridge. "Hold your fire until they're within range," Jonas said, sighting down his rifle barrel. "Make every shot count." Gray Dove gave him a sidelong glance, a hint of grim humor in her eyes. "I always do." As the riders closed to within 200 yards, the storm broke in earnest snow, swirling around them in blinding sheets. The horsemen slowed clearly, struggling to see their quarry in the sudden whiteout. "Perhaps the mountain itself protects us," Running Hawk murmured from her shelter behind the boulders. Jonas wasn't counting on divine intervention. "Stay ready," he warned. "They'll still come." But as the minutes passed and the storm intensified, the riders seemed to reconsider their pursuit. After a brief conference, visible only as dark shapes in the swirling snow, they turned their horses and retreated back along the ridge. "They're falling back," Gray Dove observed, lowering her bow slightly. "The storm has bought us time." Jonas nodded, but kept his rifle ready. "For now. But they'll be back once it passes. And they'll bring El Carnicero with them." From her shelter, Silent Rain called out urgently. Jonas turned to see her kneeling beside Willow, concern evident in her normally placid face. "She burns with fever," Silent Rain reported. "The birth, the journey. It is too much." Jonas moved to them, placing a hand on Willow's forehead. She was, indeed, burning up, her eyes glazed, her breathing shallow. The baby whimpered in Running Hawk's arms, as if sensing his mother's distress. "Can you help her?" Jonas asked Silent Rain. The healer hesitated. "I have some herbs, but—" She gestured helplessly at their barren surroundings. "I need more than I carry. She needs proper shelter, clean water." Jonas exchanged a glance with Gray Dove, reading the gravity of the situation in her eyes. Willow would not survive long in these conditions, but to move her risked drawing El Carnicero's men back to them. To stay meant certain death from exposure or Willow's worsening condition. "There is another way," Running Hawk said suddenly. She had been examining the storm-swept landscape with narrowed eyes. "The valley below. I know its pattern. I have walked it before many summers ago." "You know where the mixed band camps?" Jonas asked, hope flickering, despite his caution. Running Hawk nodded. "Not precisely, but I know where they would go in winter. A place protected from wind with a hot spring that never freezes. If they are in this valley, that is where we will find them." "How far?" Gray Dove asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "A day's walk in good weather," Running Hawk replied. "In this?" She gestured to the swirling snow. "Perhaps 2. Jonas considered their options, few as they were. "Willow won't last 2 days in this condition, and the baby needs warmth." "Then we must send someone ahead," Running Hawk decided. "Someone swift who can find the band and bring help back to us." All eyes turned to Gray Dove, the youngest and strongest among them, save for Jonas himself. "I will go," she said without hesitation. "But not alone." She looked directly at Jonas. "You know the mountains. You can track even in snow. And if El Carnicero's men find me, I will need more than my bow." Jonas understood the logic, but the thought of leaving the others defenseless troubled him. What about Willow and the children? "We will shelter here until the storm passes," Running Hawk said. "Then follow your trail down to the valley floor. The boulders will protect us from the worst of the wind." Silent Rain has enough medicine to keep Willow alive for a day. "And if El Carnicero finds you first?" Jonas asked. Running Hawk's weathered face showed no fear. "Then we will join our ancestors with dignity. But that is not what the spirits intend. The girl with the moon mark awaits us. I have seen it." Jonas had never been one to trust in visions or spirits, but he had come to respect Running Hawk's wisdom, and practicality demanded action. Willow needed help beyond what they could provide here. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow," he decided, "if the storm has eased enough to see the trail." Grey Dove nodded her agreement. "Until then, we rest and prepare." As the others settled into the meager shelter provided by the boulders, arranging blankets to block the wind, and sharing what little food remained, Jonas found himself standing at the edge of their camp, staring out into the swirling white void that had swallowed the valley. Somewhere beyond that veil of snow, Lizzie was waiting. If she lived, if Running Hawk's vision was true, if fate had not played the cruelest of jokes by raising his hopes only to dash them again. Jonas felt a presence beside him and turned to find Grey Dove, her face partially wrapped against the cold. "You doubt," she said, not a question, but an observation. "I've spent 5 years believing she was dead," Jonas replied. "Hope feels dangerous." Grey Dove was silent for a moment, her dark eyes reflecting the white swirl of snow. "My people have a saying, fear and hope are twins born of the same mother. Both look to what may come, not what is. Both distract from the path beneath your feet." "What's the alternative?" Jonas asked. "Walk the path," she said simply. "One step, then another. What will be, will be." As if to punctuate her words, the wind shifted momentarily, clearing the view to the valley below. For just an instant, Jonas thought he saw a faint glow in the distance, perhaps a campfire, perhaps merely his imagination. But in that moment, standing on Devil's Backbone, with snow falling around them and danger pressing close, Jonas made his choice. Whatever lay ahead, reunion or heartbreak, salvation or doom, he would face it on his feet, eyes open. The path was clear, even if its destination remained shrouded in mystery. Find Lizzie. Save these women who had, against all odds, become his responsibility. And perhaps, in doing so, find his own way back to the land of the living. Grey Dove seemed to sense his resolution, for she nodded once, satisfaction in the gesture. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow we hunt for your daughter." As she turned to rejoin the others, Jonas caught a glimpse of something hanging from a cord around her neck. Not the medicine pouch she usually wore, but something that glinted dully in the fading light. A small metal object shaped like a crescent moon. Dawn came reluctantly to Devil's Backbone, the sun struggling to pierce the veil of clouds left by the night storm. Jonas stood at the edge of their makeshift camp, studying the snow-covered terrain below. The storm had passed, leaving behind 6 inches of fresh powder. Enough to slow their progress, but not enough to make it impossible. Grey Dove joined him, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She had wrapped strips of rabbit fur around her moccasins for better traction in the snow, and carried a small pack with essential supplies. The bow was strapped across her back, along with the quiver of remaining arrows. "The snow hides many dangers," she said, her eyes scanning the white expanse below. "But it also covers our tracks." Jonas nodded, understanding the double-edged sword of their situation. El Carnicero's men would have difficulty tracking them, but the snow could conceal deadfalls, crevices, and other natural hazards. You still have doubts, Grey Dove observed, studying his face. Not about going, Jonas replied. About leaving them. He glanced back at the boulder shelter where Running Hawk, Silent Rain Willow, and the two infants remained. Willow's condition had worsened overnight, her fever raging despite Silent Rain's herbal remedies. They cannot travel fast enough, Grey Dove reminded him. Willow will die if we wait. And if El Carnicero finds us all together— She didn't need to finish the thought. Jonas knew the brutal reputation of the butcher, how he tortured prisoners for information, how he took particular pleasure in the suffering of women and children. If they were all captured, death might be the least of their concerns. Running Hawk approached Morning Star, bundled against her chest beneath her blanket. The old woman's face showed the strain of the past days, but her eyes remained clear and determined. "You must go now," she said without preamble, "while the clouds still hide the sun." "You're certain you can follow our trail?" Jonas asked. Running Hawk smiled a brief quirk of her weathered lips. "I tracked Apache raiders when you were still at your mother's breast, Jonas Cutter. We will find you." Jonas had to acknowledge the truth of her claim. Running Hawk had survived nearly 70 winters in this harsh land. She was far from helpless despite her age. "Head directly east from here," he instructed. "Stay within sight of the ridge until you reach the pine forest. We'll leave markers for you to follow." Running Hawk nodded. 3 days. If we have not reached you in 3 days, continue to the mixed band without us." The finality of her words struck Jonas like a physical blow. "I won't leave you behind." "You will if you must," Running Hawk replied firmly. "The girl with the moon mark is what matters now. She is the future." She glanced at the infants, Morning Star and Willow's unnamed son. "They are the future. You and I are merely the bridge that carries them to safety." Jonas wanted to argue but knew she was right. If the prophecy Running Hawk believed in had any truth, finding Lizzie was essential not just for him, but for all of them. Silent Rain emerged from the shelter carrying a small pouch, which she pressed into Jonas's hand. "For the journey," she said softly. "Herbs to give strength when yours fails." Grey Dove and Running Hawk exchanged rapid words in Apache, too quick for Jonas to catch even the few phrases he recognized. Whatever passed between them seemed to satisfy both women, for they clasped forearms in a gesture of farewell. "Go with care, daughter of my heart," Running Hawk said. Grey Dove's stoic expression flickered briefly, revealing a glimpse of the emotion she kept carefully controlled. "Stay strong, grandmother. We will return with help." With a final nod to the others, Jonas shouldered his rifle and pack. 3 days, he confirmed. "Be ready to move when we come back." Grey Dove took the lead as they descended from the ridge, her lighter weight allowing her to test the snow's stability before Jonas followed. They moved in silence, conserving breath in the thin mountain air, each step deliberate and measured. The descent took most of the morning, the fresh snow making the already treacherous trail even more dangerous. Twice Jonas nearly lost his footing on hidden ice beneath the powder. Once Grey Dove disappeared briefly into a snowbank, emerging with a curse and a bruised shoulder. By midday, they had reached the valley floor, the relative shelter of the pine forest, a welcome change from the exposed ridge. The snow was shallower here, the great trees having caught much of it in their branches. "We can make better time now," Jonas observed, grateful to be on more level ground. Grey Dove nodded, but her attention was elsewhere, studying their surroundings with wary intensity. "We are not alone in these woods," she said quietly. Jonas's hand moved to his rifle eyes, scanning the trees. "Carnicero's men— no, something else." She pointed to a barely visible track in the snow, the print of a moccasin partially filled with fresh powder. Jonas knelt to examine it more closely. Apache. Yes, but not made today. Perhaps yesterday, before the worst of the storm. Grey Dove glanced eastward. They are close. The discovery energized them both. If the mixed band was nearby, help for Willow and the others might be closer than they had dared hope. They increased their pace, moving through the forest with renewed purpose. As the afternoon waned, they began finding more signs. A recently abandoned campsite with the ashes still warm beneath the snow strands of horsehair caught on low branches. A deer carcass cleaned with the precision characteristic of Apache hunters. The band has passed this way, Grey Dove confirmed, examining the remains of the deer. No more than a day ahead of us. Jonas felt a surge of hope. If we push hard, we might catch them by nightfall. Grey Dove shook her head. Not wise. The light fails, and these woods grow dangerous after dark. Better to make camp and continue at first light. Jonas wanted to argue. Every hour of delay meant greater risk for Willow and the others left behind, but he recognized the wisdom in Grey Dove's caution. Exhaustion and darkness were a deadly combination in unfamiliar terrain. They found a suitable campsite beneath a rocky overhang, protected from the wind and partially sheltered from view. Jonas gathered firewood, while Grey Dove constructed a small lean-to from pine boughs. The work was done in comfortable silence, each anticipating the other's needs, with a synchronicity born of their shared days of travel. As twilight deepened into true darkness, they sat before a small, carefully banked fire, sharing jerky and the last of the coffee from Jonas's pack. The temperature was dropping rapidly, their breath visible in the firelight. "Tell me about your daughter," Grey Dove said suddenly, breaking the long silence. Jonas looked up, surprised by the request. "Lizzie," Grey Dove nodded. "The girl with the moon mark. What was she like? Before?" Jonas stared into the fire, memory washing over him. Quiet, but not shy. Observant. She noticed things others missed. A faint smile touched his lips. She used to bring home injured animals. Birds with broken wings, rabbits caught in traps. Said she could feel their pain, wanted to make it better. "I was a healer's spirit," Grey Dove observed. "Sarah, my wife, thought so. Taught her about herbs poultices." Lizzie took to it naturally. Jonas's expression grew distant. "After we found her in that massacre, she wouldn't speak for nearly a year. Just watched, listened. When she finally started talking, it was in complete sentences, as if she'd been storing the words up all that time." Grey Dove's hand moved unconsciously to the pendant around her neck, the crescent moon Jonas had glimpsed the day before. The marked ones are often thus. They see and understand more than they speak. Jonas's gaze fixed on the pendant. "That symbol, the crescent moon. Why do you wear it?" Grey Dove hesitated, something unusual for her. "It was a gift," she said finally, "from one who shares the mark." "Lizzie," Jonas asked, his heart suddenly pounding. Grey Dove met his eyes steadily. "I did not say that." "But you know her," Jonas pressed. "You've met her." "I know of her," Grey Dove replied carefully. "As do all our people. The one who heals with a touch, who sees what is hidden." She fingered the pendant. "This came to me through my cousin who trades with the mixed band." Jonas sensed she wasn't telling the whole truth, but he also recognized the futility of pushing further. Grey Dove would reveal what she chose when she chose to. "If she's alive," he said instead, "if we find her, what then? Will she even remember me, want to come back with me?" Grey Dove studied him, the firelight casting sharp shadows across her face. To what would she return? An empty cabin. A man who has lived with ghosts for 5 years. Her words were not cruel, merely direct. The girl you seek is not the child you lost. She has become something else. Someone else. I know that, Jonas said, though in truth he hadn't fully considered it. In his mind, Lizzie remained the 12-year-old he had last seen, not the young woman she must now be. I just want to see her, to know she's safe, to tell her I never stopped looking. But you did stop looking, Grey Dove pointed out, until Running Hawk came to your door. The observation stung because it contained truth. Jonas had abandoned the search for Lizzie years ago, had accepted her death because it was easier than living with uncertainty. I thought she was dead, he said, a defensive edge to his voice. Perhaps, Grey Dove conceded. Or perhaps it was easier to mourn the dead than to search for the living. Jonas had no answer for that. He prodded the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. Get some sleep, he said finally. I'll take first watch. Grey Dove seemed to recognize she had pushed far enough. She nodded and moved to the lean-to, wrapping herself in her blanket. Wake me at midnight, she said. And Jonas, she will remember you. The heart does not forget, even when the mind tries to protect it. With that enigmatic statement, she turned away, leaving Jonas alone with the fire and his thoughts. He stared into the flames, wondering what version of Lizzie he might find, if they found her at all. A healer revered by the Apache. A frightened girl who had adapted to survive. A young woman who had forgotten her former life entirely. And what of Grey Dove's cryptic words and the pendant she wore? There was more to her story than she had shared. Jonas was certain of it. But like so much on this journey, answers would have to wait. The night passed without incident, each taking their turn at watch while the other slept. Dawn found them already packed and moving, following the increasingly fresh signs of the mixed band's passage. By mid-morning, they had reached a series of small meadows interspersed through the forest. In one of these clearings, they found unmistakable evidence of recent occupation. Fire pits still containing warm ashes, the packed snow of many feet, scraps of food and hide. We're close, Jonas said, examining the remains of a campfire. Hours behind them, not days. Grey Dove knelt nearby, studying marks in the snow that Jonas could barely discern. Many people, perhaps 30, including children. They travel with purpose, not in flight. She looked up, satisfaction in her eyes. The army has not found them yet. Can you tell which way they went? Jonas asked. Grey Dove pointed eastward toward a narrow valley between two forested hills. There, toward the hot springs Running Hawk spoke of. They quickened their pace, energized by the proximity of their goal. The trail was clear now, a well-traveled path winding through the valley, the snow compacted by the passage of many feet. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Grey Dove suddenly froze, raising one hand in warning. Jonas halted immediately, his senses on high alert. "What is it?" he whispered. "Horses," she replied softly. "Ahead and behind." Jonas listened, hearing what had escaped his notice, the faint jingle of tack, the soft thud of hooves in snow. They were caught between two groups of riders. "The mixed band," he suggested hopefully. Grey Dove shook her head, her expression grim. "Metal, spurs, white men's horses." She glanced back the way they had come. "We are surrounded." Jonas assessed their position quickly. The trail offered little cover, the trees too widely spaced for effective concealment. Their options were limited: stand and fight, attempt to hide, or surrender. This way, he decided, leading Grey Dove off the trail into a thicket of junipers. It wasn't much cover, but it was better than nothing. "Stay low," Maybe they'll pass by. They crouched among the evergreens, breath held, as the sound of horses grew louder. Through gaps in the branches, Jonas could make out riders approaching from the east. At least 8 men, their clothing marking them as neither Apache nor El Carnicero's bandits. "Army scouts," he whispered, recognizing the manner of dress and riding style. Gray Dove tensed beside him, her hand moving to her knife. "If they find us." "They won't," Jonas assured her, though he had little confidence in his own words. "They're looking for a band of 30, not 2 people hiding in the brush." The riders drew closer, moving cautiously along the trail, rifles ready. They paused at the clearing where Jonas and Gray Dove had examined the abandoned campsite, one man dismounting to check the ashes and tracks. "Fresh, Lieutenant," he called to the leader. "Can't be more than a few hours ahead." The lieutenant, a sharp-featured man in his 30s, nodded. "We'll catch them before nightfall. Cochran, take Hanson and scout ahead. The rest of you spread out. I want a perimeter around this clearing." Jonas felt his heart sink as the soldiers began to fan out, 2 of them heading directly toward the juniper thicket. Discovery was now inevitable. "When they find us," he murmured to Gray Dove, "let me do the talking. Don't reach for your weapons." She gave him a sidelong look of skepticism, but nodded her agreement. The soldiers were within 20 feet of their hiding place when a shout from the opposite side of the clearing drew their attention. "Lieutenant Morris riders coming in from the west." The lieutenant turned, signaling his men to take defensive positions. Jonas and Gray Dove remained frozen in their concealment, watching as a second group of horsemen emerged from the trees. Jonas felt a jolt of recognition. Leading the newcomers was a familiar figure. Sheriff Tom Blackwood from Redemption, his silver star visible even at this distance. Behind him rode 4 other men, none of whom Jonas recognized. "Hold your fire," Blackwood called as the soldiers raised their rifles. "We're friendlies." Lieutenant Morris approached cautiously, his hand on his sidearm. "State your business, Sheriff. This is a military operation." "I'm aware," Blackwood replied, dismounting. "I'm here under authority of Territorial Governor Prescott. We're tracking fugitives from Redemption, a white man named Jonas Cutter, and several Apache women." Jonas felt Gray Dove tense beside him. Her hand moved imperceptibly toward her knife, but he placed his own hand over hers, a silent plea for patience. "Cutter," Morris repeated. "The former scout." "The same," Blackwood confirmed. "He's harboring Apaches from the band that attacked homesteads north of Diablo Canyon. Governor wants them brought in, alive if possible." Jonas knew this was a lie. There had been no attacks, and Blackwood knew it. "But what game was the sheriff playing? We're after bigger game," Morris replied. "A mixed band of hostiles, 30 strong, led by a woman they call the Healer. Army's offering a substantial reward." Blackwood nodded, as if this information confirmed his suspicions. "Our fugitives are headed to join that same band. Cutter's got some notion that his daughter, missing these 5 years, is living with them." Morris's eyebrows rose. "The Healer is Cutter's daughter. That complicates matters." "Complicates them how?" Blackwood asked. "My orders are specific," Morris said, lowering his voice, though Jonas could still hear him. "The Healer is to be captured or killed, regardless of her origin. She's stirring up resistance among the scattered bands, giving them hope of pushing the white man out of the territory." Gray Dove's expression darkened at these words, but she remained silent, watching the exchange with predatory intensity. "I can't interfere with your orders," Blackwood said after a moment. "But I'd appreciate it if you kept an eye out for Cutter and his Apache women. Man's not in his right mind. Lost his wife years back, never recovered. These women took advantage, filled his head with stories that his daughter's still alive." Jonas felt a surge of anger at this characterization, but beneath it, confusion. Blackwood was painting him as deluded, manipulated. Why was he trying to help or hinder their mission? Morris seemed to consider this information. "We haven't seen any sign of your fugitives, but we'll watch for them. Meanwhile, you should turn back, Sheriff. What's ahead is military business." Blackwood looked as if he might argue, then nodded reluctantly. "Fair enough. But if you find Cutter, I'd appreciate if you'd hold him for me. Man needs help, not a bullet." "No promises," Morris replied. "If he's with hostiles, he'll be treated as one." The conversation concluded, Morris ordered his men to mount up. The patrol continued eastward, following the trail of the mixed band, while Blackwood and his deputies turned their horses westward. Jonas and Gray Dove remained hidden until both groups were out of sight, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. "That was fortunate," Gray Dove observed, rising cautiously from their concealment. "Too fortunate," Jonas replied, his mind working through the implications of what they had overheard. "Blackwood knows I'm not deluded. He knows the women didn't manipulate me. Why would he say that?" "To protect you," Gray Dove suggested. "He made you seem foolish, not dangerous. A man to be pitied, not hunted." Jonas had to acknowledge the logic in this interpretation. By painting him as mentally unsound, Blackwood had potentially saved his life if Morris's men had found him. "But he's still tracking us," Jonas pointed out. "And now we know the army is specifically targeting Lizzie, the healer." Gray Dove's expression was grim. "The noose tightens. We must reach the mixed band before the soldiers do." "They're moving east," Jonas said, thinking aloud, "following the main trail." But Running Hawk mentioned hot springs to the northeast in a sheltered valley. That's where the band would winter. "The soldiers follow a false trail," Gray Dove realized. "The band has scattered, leaving signs to mislead pursuers." Jonas nodded. It was a classic Apache tactic. Divide the group, create multiple trails, reunite at a predetermined location known only to the band members. "We need to find the real trail," he said, "the one that leads to the winter camp." Gray Dove studied their surroundings with renewed focus. "There," she said after a moment, pointing to a nearly invisible path leading away from the main trail. "See how the snow is disturbed, not by many feet, but by branches dragged to cover tracks." Jonas might have missed it entirely had she not pointed it out. A subtle pattern in the snow that suggested deliberate concealment rather than natural disturbance. "Good eye," he acknowledged. "Let's go." They moved cautiously now, alert for signs of other patrols or scouts. The hidden trail led them through increasingly rough terrain, dense thickets, steep ravines areas where they had to scramble over rock formations. It was a route deliberately chosen to discourage pursuit, especially by men on horseback. By late afternoon, the character of the forest began to change. The pines grew taller, more widely spaced. The ground sloped gently downward into a bowl-shaped valley, sheltered on three sides by steep cliffs. A thin haze hung over the center of the valley, steam rising from the hot springs Running Hawk had described. "We're close," Gray Dove murmured, her pace quickening despite the long day's journey. As they descended into the valley, Jonas detected the first signs of habitation. A faint smell of wood smoke, the distant whinny of a horse. Then, as they rounded a stand of massive pines, they saw it the winter camp of the mixed band. Unlike traditional Apache camps, this one reflected its diverse membership. 20 or more structures formed a rough circle around the central springs. Some were traditional wickiups, others more substantial log and hide shelters built for the winter months. Horses were corralled in a natural enclosure, formed by a curve in the cliff face. Children played in the open area, near the steaming pools, their laughter carrying in the clear mountain air. "They live well here." Grey Dove observed a note of pride in her voice. "Protected from weather and enemies alike." Jonas scanned the camp, his heart racing with anticipation and fear. Somewhere among those shelters Lizzie might be waiting. His daughter alive after all these years, transformed into the healer that even the army feared. "How do we approach?" he asked. "They'll have sentries." "They already know we're here," Grey Dove replied calmly. Jonas followed her gaze and saw them, 4 warriors positioned among the trees, bows drawn, watching their every move. They had been detected long before they spotted the camp. Grey Dove straightened, raising her empty hands in the universal gesture of peace. She called out in Apache, her voice carrying across the distance. Jonas couldn't understand her words, but he recognized names. Running Hawk, Silent Rain Willow. After a tense moment, one of the warriors responded, his tone questioning. Grey Dove answered, gesturing toward Jonas. The exchange continued for several minutes, the warriors gradually lowering their weapons, though remaining wary. "What did you tell them?" Jonas asked quietly. "That we come seeking help for our people stranded on Devil's Backbone. That Running Hawk sent us. That you are the White Scout who once saved Apache children from the army's knives." She glanced at him. "I did not mention the girl with the moon mark. Not yet." The lead warrior approached a tall man with a scarred face and calculating eyes. He addressed Jonas directly in accented but clear English. "You are Cutter, the one who deserted rather than kill children." Jonas nodded. 15 years ago, under Captain Reynolds at Yellow Creek." The warrior studied him, searching for truth or deception. "Why do you come to us now?" "We have women and infants stranded on Devil's Backbone," Jonas explained. "One is very ill after childbirth. They need shelter medicine." "And that is all you seek?" The warrior's penetrating gaze suggested he suspected other motives. Jonas hesitated, then decided on honesty. "No, I'm also looking for my daughter, taken 5 years ago when my wife was killed. I was told she might be living among your people." "This daughter," the warrior said carefully. "She has a name, Elizabeth," Jonas replied. "Lizzie, but she would be 16 now. She might use another name." "And how would we know this girl is yours?" the warrior pressed. "Many white children were taken in raids or brought to us after their families died of sickness or hunger." "She has a birthmark," Jonas said, "shaped like a crescent moon on her right shoulder. And she would remember me, her father, Jonas." Something flickered in the warrior's eyes, recognition perhaps, or caution. He exchanged rapid words with the other sentries, then turned back to Jonas and Grey Dove. "You will come to the council fire," he decided. "The elders will hear your story. They will decide about your women on the mountain and about this daughter you seek." It wasn't the immediate reunion Jonas had hoped for, but it was better than outright rejection. He nodded his acceptance of these terms. As they followed the warriors toward the camp, Jonas felt a strange mixture of emotions, hope and dread, anticipation and fear. 5 years of grief and guilt had led him to this moment. Whatever awaited him in that circle of shelters would forever change the course of his life. Grey Dove walked beside him, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. But Jonas noticed her hand had moved to the crescent moon pendant around her neck, her fingers tracing its familiar shape, as if drawing strength or guidance from it. The camp fell silent as they entered, all activity ceasing as men, women, and children turned to observe the newcomers. Jonas felt the weight of their collective gaze, curious, wary, assessing. He kept his own eyes forward, focused on the large fire pit in the center of the encampment, where several elders sat in council. Among them, a figure draped in a blanket of indigo blue rose to her feet, her back to Jonas as she spoke with an older man beside her. Something about her posture, the way she held her head, sent a shock of recognition through him. The warrior leading them called out, announcing their presence to the council. The figure in blue turned slowly, the blanket falling away from her face. Jonas stopped breathing. She was taller, her face thinner, and more defined than he remembered. Her dark hair hung in a single braid over one shoulder decorated with beads and feathers that marked her status in the band. But her eyes, those were unchanged, the same deep brown eyes that had looked up at him with trust and love when she was a child, Lizzie. She showed no immediate recognition, her gaze moving from the warriors to Grey Dove, then finally to Jonas. For an eternal moment she studied him, her expression unreadable. Then something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of memory, a spark of connection across the years of separation. Her lips parted slightly, a word forming that Jonas couldn't hear over the pounding of his heart. Father. The world narrowed to that single word, that one face among many. Jonas took a step forward, then another, every moment of the past 5 years, falling away like shadows in the dawn light. Lizzie, he whispered, I found you. As father and daughter regarded each other across the council fire, neither moving, neither able to bridge the final distance, Grey Dove stepped forward. She removed the crescent moon pendant from around her neck and held it out to Lizzie, an offering or perhaps a reminder. Lizzie took it, her fingers closing around the familiar symbol. She looked from the pendant to Grey Dove, understanding passing between them, some secret knowledge that Jonas couldn't decipher. Then she turned back to Jonas, her expression softening into something like wonder mixed with sorrow. You came, she said simply. After all this time, you came. Before Jonas could respond, a commotion at the edge of the camp drew everyone's attention. A young warrior burst into the circle, his breathing ragged from hard running. Soldiers, he called in Apache, the word similar enough to English for Jonas to understand. Army scouts coming up the eastern trail, and behind them, Mexican riders, El Carnicero's men. The peaceful moment shattered the camp, erupting into organized chaos, as warriors prepared for defense, and women gathered children and essential supplies. Lizzie turned to the elders, speaking rapidly in Apache, her authority evident in how they responded to her instructions. What's happening? Jonas asked, moving to her side. The army found the true trail, she replied, her English precise but flavored with Apache cadence. And El Carnicero follows them. We must evacuate the most vulnerable through the Western Pass. She met his eyes directly for the first time. But first, we must rescue your companions on Devil's Backbone. They lie directly in the path of those who hunt us. Willow is too sick to move, Grey Dove reminded them. And the infants? I will go to them, Lizzie decided. My medicine is stronger than silent rains. I can help Willow travel. I'm coming with you, Jonas said immediately. Lizzie hesitated, then nodded. Yes, we go together. She turned to Grey Dove. Prepare horses. 3 with supplies for a hard journey. We leave within the hour. As Grey Dove departed to carry out these instructions, Jonas found himself alone with his daughter for the first time in 5 years. The questions he had carried for so long crowded his mind, but in this moment of crisis, only one truly mattered. Lizzie, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Do you remember what happened the day your mother died? A shadow passed across her face, old pain surfacing briefly before she mastered it. Yes, I remember everything. Tell me, Jonas urged. Please, I need to know. Lizzie glanced toward the camp entrance, where warriors were already mounting up to scout the approaching threat. There is no time for the full story now. But know this, it was not Apache who killed Mother. It was white men painted as Apache, men who sought me for the mark I bear. El Carnicero's men, Jonas surmised. Yes, the one you call the Butcher has hunted me since I was a child. He believes the prophecy, that one born of two bloods bearing the mark of the moon will lead to a great treasure. Her expression hardened. He killed Mother when she tried to hide me. I fled into the forest, was found by Apache hunters who recognized my mark and brought me to their village. All these years, Jonas whispered, I thought you were dead, or worse. I thought the same of you, Lizzie replied, until Grey Dove came to us 3 months ago, bearing news of a white man living alone near redemption. A man who kept a child's doll on his shelf and spoke to graves on a hillside. Jonas glanced toward Grey Dove, who was returning with 3 horses. She knew who you were all this time. She suspected, Lizzie corrected, but could not be certain until she saw you with her own eyes. The pendant was a test to see if you would recognize it. The pieces began to fall into place. Grey Dove's careful ambiguity when speaking of Lizzie, her insistence on accompanying Jonas to town the way she had studied him when they first met. She came to your cabin with Running Hawk to confirm if you were truly my father, Lizzie continued, to judge if you were worthy of finding me again. And was I? Jonas asked, a lifetime of doubt contained in those 3 words. Lizzie's expression softened a ghost of the child she had been visible beneath the woman she had become. You opened your door to those you had every reason to hate. You risked your life to protect them. What do you think? Before Jonas could respond, Grey Dove approached with the horses. We must go, she said urgently. Scouts report the soldiers have split their forces. Some follow the eastern trail, others head toward Devil's Backbone. Lizzie nodded, all vulnerability vanishing beneath the mantle of leadership she had assumed among the mixed band. Gather what we need. We ride within minutes. As she moved away to collect her medicines and weapons, Jonas turned to Grey Dove. You knew, he said simply. From the beginning. She met his gaze without flinching. I suspected. Running Hawk was certain. Why the deception? Why not tell me outright? Would you have believed us? Grey Dove countered. Or would you have thought it a trick to gain your protection? She shook her head. You needed to make the journey yourself, to prove your worth not just to us, but to yourself. Jonas wanted to be angry at the manipulation, but he recognized the truth in her words. 5 years ago, would he have believed a group of Apache women claiming his daughter lived among their people? Or would he have dismissed it as a desperate ploy? She has changed, Grey Dove said more gently. She is not only your Lizzie now. She is Calistewa, Sparrow Woman, healer, and leader to our people. You must be prepared for that. Jonas nodded, understanding the warning beneath the words. The girl he had lost was gone forever. The woman who had taken her place was a stranger in many ways, one he would need to know anew. Lizzie returned, now dressed for hard riding in buckskins with a medicine pouch at her belt and a rifle slung across her back. She had painted a crescent moon in white on each cheekbone, a symbol of her identity and power among the Apache. The band will scatter into small groups, she informed them, mounting her horse with practiced ease. They will reunite at the summer grounds when the snow melts. Until then, we must keep El Carnicero from capturing any who might lead him to the others. And Running Hawk? The women on Devil's Backbone, Jonas asked, swinging into his own saddle. We will reach them before the soldiers, Lizzie replied, with a confidence that brooked no argument. But we must ride hard. and without rest. As they prepared to depart, an elder approached speaking to Lizzie in rapid Apache. She listened, then nodded gravely. Turning to Jonas and Grey Dove, she translated, "The scouts report El Carnicero himself rides with his men. This is unusual. Normally he sends others to do his hunting." Her expression darkened. "It means he is desperate, or confident of success." "How many men?" Jonas asked. 15, perhaps 20, well armed. Jonas calculated the odds, 3 of them against 20 professional killers with Running Hawk, and the others caught in between. The situation was grim at best, hopeless at worst. Yet, as he looked at Lizzie, his daughter alive and transformed into this capable, confident woman, he felt something he had not experienced in 5 years' purpose. Not merely the selfish desire to know if she lived, but the deeper need to protect her and the people who had sheltered her when he could not. "We'll reach them first," he said with a conviction that surprised even him. "We'll get them out." Lizzie studied him, perhaps seeing for the first time the man he had once been, the skilled scout, the protector, the father who had loved her enough to defy his commanding officer and desert, rather than allow her to be killed. "Yes," she agreed, a hint of pride in her voice. "We will." With a final look at the camp, now busily preparing for evacuation, they turned their horses toward the western trail and Devil's Backbone. Behind them, smoke began to rise as the band burned what could not be carried, leaving nothing for their pursuers to use or interpret. Jonas rode beside his daughter, still unable to fully believe she was real, that the emptiness of the past 5 years had been built on a mistake. There would be time later for explanations for healing the wounds of their separation. For now, they rode together toward a common purpose, to save those who had, in their different ways, saved them both. As they crested the first rise and the camp disappeared from view, Lizzie turned to him, her expression softening briefly. "I never forgot you," she said. "Even when I thought you dead, I kept you here." She touched her heart. "As you kept me." Oneas thought of the rag doll on his shelf, the grave he had visited each day, the emptiness he had cultivated, rather than face the pain of uncertain hope. "Always," he replied, the single word carrying the weight of 5 years of grief and the promise of a future he had not dared imagine. They rode westward, 3 figures against the vast wilderness pursued by enemies and racing against time. Ahead lay Devil's Backbone, and those who waited for their return. Behind them, the smoke of the abandoned camp rose like a signal fire against the deepening blue of the afternoon sky. The final confrontation was coming. Jonas could feel it with the same certainty that had once made him the army's most valued scout. El Carnicero would not stop until he had what he sought. The girl with the moon mark, the key to his prophesied treasure. The army would not rest until the troublesome mixed band was eliminated or confined to the reservation. Between these forces stood Jonas Cutter, a man who had lost everything and now improbably found himself with something to fight for again. As they urged their horses to greater speed, he made a silent vow. This time he would not fail those who depended on him. This time he would stand his ground. The land of the opposed had claimed him once more. They rode as if pursued by demons, which in a way they were. The afternoon sun cast long shadows before them as they pushed their horses to the limits of endurance. Jonas rode slightly behind Lizzie, still unable to fully comprehend that the confident woman leading them was the child he had mourned for 5 years. Grey Dove flanked them, her sharp eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of danger. "We need to rest the horses," Jonas called after several hours of hard riding. "They won't make it to Devil's Backbone at this pace." Lizzie reined in reluctantly, her expression suggesting she would prefer to continue despite the risk. "A short rest," she agreed. "There's a stream ahead where they can drink." They dismounted in a small clearing beside a creek that still flowed beneath a thin layer of ice. While the horses drank, Jonas studied his daughter openly, noting the changes time had wrought. The child he remembered had been shy, but curious, quick to smile. This woman moved with purpose and authority, her eyes constantly assessing, calculating. She wore her Apache garments with the natural ease of one who had lived in them for years, the beadwork and feathers marking her status among the mixed band. "You're staring," Lizzie observed without looking at him, her attention on a small pouch of medicine she was preparing. Jonas didn't deny it. 5 years of believing you dead. I'm still convincing myself you're real." Something in his voice caused her to look up, her expression softening briefly. "I understand. When Grey Dove first spoke of a white man who might be my father, I didn't dare believe." "But you sent her to find out," Jonas said. "To test me." "Yes." Lizzie's directness was reminiscent of Grey Dove's, the Apache manner of speaking without unnecessary embellishment. "I needed to know if you were still the man I remembered. The one who taught me to ride, to read tracks, to stand up for what was right, even when it cost you everything." Jonas felt a surge of emotion at these memories, teaching Lizzie to sit a horse when she was barely big enough to reach the stirrups, showing her how to read the stories written in the desert sand. "And did she find that man?" he asked, uncertain of the answer himself. Lizzie exchanged a glance with Grey Dove, who had been listening silently. "She found a man broken by grief, but not destroyed by it. A man who opened his door to strangers who needed help, even when they belonged to the people he blamed for his pain." And she touched the medicine pouch at her belt. That was enough. Grey Dove approached, leading the horses. "The sun falls. We should continue." Lizzie nodded, all vulnerability vanishing as she focused once more on their mission. "We'll reach Devil's Backbone by midnight if we push hard. The full moon will give us light enough to find our way." As they mounted up, Jonas found himself watching the easy communication between Lizzie and Grey Dove, the unspoken understanding between them suggesting a deeper bond than he had initially perceived. "How do you two know each other?" he asked as they resumed their journey, albeit at a slightly less punishing pace, to conserve the horse's strength. "Grey Dove is my sister," Lizzie replied simply. "Sister?" Jonas repeated, confused. "Not by blood," Grey Dove clarified, "but by choice and trial. When Lizzie came to our village 5 winters ago, wounded in body and spirit, I was assigned as her guardian. We shared the same wiki-up, trained together, hunted together." Her expression, usually so guarded, revealed a flicker of affection. "She learned our ways quickly. Too quickly, some thought." "The elders were suspicious of me at first," Lizzie added. "A white girl with the moon mark appearing just as winter approached. Some believed I was a spy, or worse, a witch sent to bring destruction." She adjusted her position in the saddle, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "But when sickness came to the village that winter, I remembered Mother's teachings about herbs and healing. I helped those who were ill." "She saved the chief's youngest son," Grey Dove continued. "A fever that had already claimed 3 children. After that, the people began to speak of her differently, not as the white girl, but as Callistoa, the sparrow woman who brings healing." Jonas felt a complex mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in the woman Lizzie had become, sorrow for the years he had missed witnessing her transformation. And the prophecy, the one about the child of 2 bloods. Lizzie's expression grew more serious. "An old story among our people, that one born of 2 worlds bearing the mark of the moon would lead the people to a place of safety when darkness threatened to consume them. She glanced at Jonas. I never sought such a role. But as the army pushed more bands onto the reservations, as disease and starvation claimed more lives, people began to look to me for hope, as well as healing. The mixed band formed around her, Grey Dove explained. Survivors from different tribes, families torn apart by the army's campaigns, even some Mexicans and whites who had nowhere else to go. They came seeking the healer, the one who might fulfill the prophecy. And do you believe it? Jonas asked his daughter directly. This prophecy. Lizzie was silent for a moment, considering. I believe that people need hope to survive. Whether I am truly the one from the prophecy matters less than what I can do for those who have lost everything else. She met his gaze briefly. You taught me that, Father, that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are what give us strength to continue when all seems lost. The simple acknowledgement, Father, struck Jonas with unexpected force. Until that moment, a part of him had still doubted whether this remarkable young woman truly accepted him as her father after so many years apart. El Carnicero believes the prophecy, Grey Dove interjected, her tone hardening, but he interprets it differently. He thinks the place of safety is a lost gold mine from the days of the conquistadors. He believes the child with the moon mark will lead him to unimaginable wealth. Is that why he killed your mother? Jonas asked, his voice rough with renewed grief and anger. For gold, for power, Lizzie corrected. The gold is merely a means to that end. With enough wealth, he could build an army-controlled territory on both sides of the border. He's been searching for years, killing anyone who might know anything about the prophecy or the child it speaks of. Her expression darkened. When he learned of a white family with an adopted Apache girl bearing the moon mark, she didn't need to finish. Jonas could fill in the terrible blank. How El Carnicero's men had come to their homestead disguised as Apache to deflect blame how they had killed Sarah, when she refused to reveal Lizzie's whereabouts, how Lizzie had fled into the wilderness rather than be captured. I should have been there, Jonas said, the old guilt rising like bile in his throat. I could have protected you both. Or died alongside Mother, Lizzie replied, her tone gentle but firm. What happened was not your fault. The only blame lies with the man who ordered the attack, El Carnicero. They rode in silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. As the terrain gradually became more rugged, the first slopes of Devil's Backbone rising before them. The full moon emerged from behind clouds, casting the landscape in silver light and deep shadow. We're being followed, Grey Dove said suddenly, her keen senses detecting what Jonas and Lizzie had missed. Jonas turned in his saddle, scanning the trail behind them. In the moonlight, he could just make out riders in the distance, perhaps half a mile back, moving at a steady pace. How many? Lizzie asked, not slowing her own mount. 4, maybe 5, Grey Dove replied. Too few to be the main force. Scouts, most likely. El Carniceros, or the armies, Jonas wondered aloud. Does it matter? Grey Dove's tone was pragmatic. Neither would let us pass peacefully. Lizzie assessed their options quickly. We're too exposed here. We need to reach the higher ground before they catch up. She urged her horse to a faster pace, leading them toward a narrow trail that wound upward along the mountain's flank. The ascent was treacherous, in the moonlight loose shale sliding beneath the horses' hooves as they picked their way upward. Behind them, the pursuers gained ground close enough now that Jonas could hear the occasional clink of metal, gun barrels against saddle horns, spurs against stirrups. They're pushing hard to catch us before we reach the ridge, Jonas observed. They must know we're headed for the others. Or they hope to capture us before we can join forces with the main band, Lizzie suggested. Either way, we can't outrun them on this terrain. Then we fight, Gray Dove said simply, already checking her bow. Lizzie nodded, her decision made. There's a switchback ahead with good cover. We'll make our stand there. The spot Lizzie chose was indeed defensible, a sharp bend in the trail where large boulders provided natural protection. Below, the path was exposed for several hundred yards, forcing any pursuers to approach in the open. They dismounted quickly, securing the horses behind the largest boulder. Jonas checked his rifle and revolver, noting with approval that Lizzie did the same with practiced efficiency. Gray Dove positioned herself slightly higher, where her bow would have the best angle of fire. We hold them here, Lizzie instructed. Force them to withdraw or find another route. Every hour we delay them is another hour for Running Hawk, and the others to see the danger coming. Jonas took position behind a boulder rifle resting on its flat top. Let them get close before we fire, he advised. Make every shot count. They didn't have to wait long. Within minutes, the riders appeared on the trail below. 4 men moving cautiously, now aware they were approaching a potential ambush point. Jonas studied them through the rifle's sight, noting their mismatched clothing and weapons. Not soldiers, he murmured. Carnicero's men. Lizzie nodded grimly. They've split their forces. These are just the advance scouts. The riders halted about 200 yards below, conferring briefly, before 2 dismounted and began to work their way upward on foot, using the sparse vegetation for cover. The other 2 remained with the horses' rifles ready. Gray Dove, take the ones below, Lizzie directed. Father and I will handle those approaching on foot. Jonas felt a surge of pride at her calm command, the natural leadership she displayed. He settled deeper into his position, controlling his breathing as he tracked the first man through his rifle sight. Let them get within 50 yards, Lizzie whispered. We need to be sure. The approaching men moved with the caution of experienced hunters, using every bit of cover available. But the mountainside offered little concealment, and soon they were within the range Lizzie had specified. Now, she said. Jonas squeezed the trigger, his shot echoing across the mountainside. The lead man dropped immediately, clutching his leg, where Jonas's bullet had found its mark. From above, Gray Dove's bow sang, sending an arrow arcing downward to land with deadly precision in the chest of one of the mounted men. The night erupted into chaos. The second man on foot dove for cover, returning fire wildly. The remaining rider below spurred his horse to shelter behind an outcropping, then began firing up at their position. Lizzie rose slightly, aimed with deliberate care, and fired. The man on foot jerked backward, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. 2 down, she reported calmly, reloading without haste. Gray Dove's second arrow missed its mark, as the final rider maneuvered his horse erratically, making himself a difficult target. He returned fire with a pistol, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them. He's trying to keep us pinned while the wounded one escapes, Jonas observed, noting the first man dragging himself back down the trail despite his injured leg. Let him go, Lizzie decided. He'll slow the others when he reaches them, and they'll know this route is well defended. The remaining rider seemed to reach the same conclusion. After a final volley of ineffective fire, he wheeled his horse and galloped back down the trail, leaving his dead companion behind. They'll try another approach now, Jonas said, watching the rider disappear into the darkness. Probably circle around, look for another way up the mountain. Which gives us time, Lizzie replied, already moving back to the horses. We need to reach the others before El Carnicero realizes his advanced scouts have failed and commits his main force. They mounted quickly and continued their ascent, pushing the horses as much as they dared on the treacherous terrain. The trail grew steeper, narrower, the drop to their right becoming more precipitous with each switchback. After an hour of hard climbing, they reached the ridge proper. Devil's Backbone, the knife edge of rock that formed the mountain's spine. Here the wind blew fierce and cold, unimpeded by trees or lesser peaks. The moonlight cast the landscape in stark relief shadows pooling like ink in the valleys below. The boulder shelter should be about 2 miles along the ridge, Jonas said, orienting himself by the familiar landmarks. If Running Hawk and the others are still there. They rode single file now, the path barely wide enough for the horses. Lizzie led, followed by Jonas, with Grey Dove bringing up the rear, frequently glancing back to check for pursuit. They had traveled perhaps half the distance when Grey Dove called out, "Riders coming up from the west." Jonas turned to look. On a parallel trail below the ridge, torches were visible, a dozen or more moving steadily upward. "That's not the way we came," he observed grimly. "They must have found another route." "El Carnicero," Lizzie confirmed, her voice hardening. "He knows these mountains too well. We need to hurry." They urged their tired mounts forward, aware that the race was now truly on. The pursuers had the advantage of numbers and fresh horses. Jonas and his companions had only their determination and intimate knowledge of their destination. As they rounded a curve in the ridge, Jonas felt his heart leap into his throat. Ahead, barely visible in the moonlight, a thin trail of smoke rose from among a cluster of boulders, the shelter where they had left Running Hawk and the others. "They're still there," he said with relief. "And they have a fire lit," Lizzie added, concern in her voice. "They don't know danger approaches." They covered the remaining distance at dangerous speed, the horses' hooves sending showers of gravel over the edge of the precipitous drop to their right. As they drew closer, Jonas called out, "Running Hawk, silent rain!" A figure appeared among the boulders, Running Hawk, Morning Star, bundled against her chest. She raised a hand in greeting, then froze as she took in their expressions and the urgency of their approach. "Danger comes," she said as they dismounted beside the shelter. It was not a question. "El Carnicero and his men," Lizzie confirmed, embracing the old woman briefly. "Less than an hour behind us, and soldiers approaching from the east." Running Hawk absorbed this news with characteristic stoicism. "Willow cannot travel," she said, gesturing toward the shelter. "The fever has grown worse." Lizzie moved immediately to where Willow lay, Silent Rain kneeling beside her. The young mother's face was flushed with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Beside her, her newborn son slept swaddled tightly in a deerskin blanket. "How long has she been like this?" Lizzie asked, placing a hand on Willow's forehead. "The fever rose yesterday," Silent Rain replied, relief evident in her voice at seeing the healer. "I have given her all the medicines I carry, but without proper herbs." Lizzie was already opening her medicine pouch, selecting various dried plants with practiced fingers. "Heat water," she instructed, "quickly." While Lizzie prepared her medicines, Jonas and Grey Dove conferred with Running Hawk about their situation. "We found the mixed band," Jonas explained. "They're breaking camp, scattering into smaller groups to evade the army." "And your daughter?" Running Hawk asked, her dark eyes searching his. Jonas glanced toward Lizzie, still busy with her preparations. "You knew," he said. "You knew she was alive, that she had become the healer." Running Hawk nodded. "I suspected. When I saw her 3 moons ago gathering plants near Diablo Canyon, something in her movements reminded me of you. The way she tracked, the way she studied the land. These things are taught, not born." A faint smile touched her weathered face. "And she has your stubbornness." "Why didn't you tell me directly?" Jonas asked. "Why the elaborate test? Would you have believed an old Apache woman claiming your daughter lived, or would you have thought it a trick?" Running Hawk's expression was knowing. "You needed to find your own way to the truth. and she needed to be certain you were worthy of finding her. Grey Dove interrupted this exchange. The torches are close, sir. We have perhaps half an hour before they reach us. Jonas assessed their situation with a scout's practiced eye. Their position was defensible, but ultimately untenable. With the ridge at their backs and steep drops on three sides, there was nowhere to retreat if El Carnicero's men pushed hard enough. We can't stay here, he decided. Once Lizzie has treated Willow, we need to move, continue east along the ridge until we can descend to the valley on the other side. And if Willow cannot travel, Running Hawk asked, then some of us stay to defend, while the rest continue, Jonas replied grimly. But I don't intend to leave anyone behind. Lizzie emerged from the shelter, wiping her hands on a cloth. I've given her something for the fever. It will take time to work, but she should be strong enough to travel within the hour. We don't have an hour, Grey Dove pointed out, gesturing toward the approaching torches, now visibly closer. Lizzie considered this, her expression resolute. Then we must buy time. She turned to Jonas. How well do you remember the ridge trail ahead? Well enough, he replied. It continues east for about 3 miles before descending toward Bear Creek Canyon. And are there places where the trail narrows, where only 1 or 2 men could pass at a time? Jonas thought for a moment. Yes, several. The worst is about a mile ahead. Devil's Throat, the locals call it. The ridge pinches down to barely 3 feet wide with 1,000-foot drops on either side. Lizzie nodded, a plan forming. Perfect. Grey Dove and I will go back along the trail, create a diversion to slow Carnicero's men. You lead the others toward Devil's Throat. We'll rejoin you there. No, Jonas said, immediately alarmed at the thought of separating from his newly found daughter. I'll go with Grey Dove. You stay with the others. The women need a healer more than they need another rifle, Lizzie countered. And Grey Dove and I have fought together before. We know each other's movements can communicate without words. Her expression softened slightly at his evident concern. I didn't survive 5 years among the Apache by being careless father. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Jonas wanted to argue further, but the logic of her plan was undeniable. And something in her eyes, a quiet confidence, a certainty in her own abilities, reminded him forcefully of Sarah. His wife had possessed the same steadfast determination when her mind was made up. An hour, he conceded reluctantly. If you haven't rejoined us at Devil's Throat by then, I'm coming back for you. Lizzie nodded, accepting these terms. Help me prepare Willow for travel. The medicine should ease her fever enough to move her, but she'll need support. Together, they returned to the shelter where Silent Rain had already begun gathering their meager belongings. Willow was sitting up now, still feverish but more alert. Her son lay in her arms, remarkably quiet, for a newborn only days old. Can you ride? Jonas asked her gently. Willow nodded, determination in her eyes despite her weakness. For my son, I can ride. We'll help you, Lizzie assured her, mixing a final preparation of herbs. Drink this. It will give you strength for the journey. While Willow drank the medicine, Jonas and Running Hawk prepared the horses. They had 5 mounts now. The 3 Jonas, Lizzie, and Grey Dove had ridden plus 2 that had been hidden in a small cave near the shelter kept in reserve in case evacuation became necessary. Willow will ride with Silent Rain, Jonas decided. Running Hawk, you take Morning Star and Willow's son. I'll lead the way and guard our rear once we're moving. The preparations were made with the efficiency of people accustomed to swift departures. Within minutes, Willow was mounted, leaning against Silent Rain for support. Running Hawk had created a sling that allowed her to carry both infants securely against her chest, leaving her hands free to manage her horse. As they prepared to separate, Lizzie approached Jonas. "We'll buy you as much time as we can," she said, checking her rifle one final time. "Head straight for Devil's Throat. It's the most defensible position on the ridge." Jonas nodded, still uncomfortable with the plan, but recognizing its necessity. "Be careful," he said, the words inadequate to express the depth of his concern. "I just found you. I can't lose you again." Lizzie's expression softened momentarily. She reached out, touching his arm in a rare gesture of affection. "You won't lose me. The prophecy doesn't end this way." Before he could respond, she turned to Grey Dove, exchanging a few rapid words in Apache. Then the two women mounted their horses and rode back along the ridge toward the approaching torches of El Carnicero's men. Jonas watched them go, a knot of fear and pride tangled in his chest. Then he turned to the remaining women. "Let's move. We need to reach Devil's Throat before they break through." They set out eastward along the ridge, moving as quickly as Willow's condition allowed. The moon provided enough light to navigate, though Jonas remained acutely aware of the precipitous drops to either side. Behind them, the night was suddenly pierced by the crack of rifle fire, Lizzie and Grey Dove engaging the enemy. "They draw fire upon themselves to cover our escape." Running Hawk observed her tone a mixture of concern and pride. Jonas nodded grimly. "Let's make sure it's not in vain." They pushed onward, the horses picking their way carefully along the narrow ridge trail. Willow swayed occasionally in her saddle, but Silent Rain held her steady, murmuring encouragement. The infants remarkably remained quiet, as if sensing the need for stealth. The gunfire behind them intensified briefly, then began to move, Lizzie and Grey Dove falling back, drawing their pursuers into a running engagement that would slow their advance without risking direct confrontation with superior numbers. After what seemed an eternity, but was perhaps 30 minutes, Jonas spotted their destination ahead, Devil's Throat, where the ridge narrowed dramatically between two sheer cliff faces. Here the trail was barely wide enough for a single horse, the drops on either side stretching down into darkness. "We'll make our stand here," he said, helping the women dismount in the slightly wider area just before the narrowest section. "Get Willow and the children across to the other side. I'll hold this position until Lizzie and Grey Dove arrive." Silent Rain helped Willow across the treacherous narrows, while Running Hawk followed with the infants. Jonas positioned himself behind a large boulder rifle, ready, watching the trail they had just traversed. The gunfire was closer now, sporadic rather than continuous. He could make out at least 3 distinct weapons, Lizzie's rifle with its deeper report, and Grey Dove's lighter carbine exchanging fire with what sounded like multiple pistols. Then emerging from the darkness came 2 riders moving at dangerous speed, Lizzie and Grey Dove pushing their mounts to the limit. Behind them, torches bobbed as El Carnicero's men closed the distance. "They're coming in," Jonas called to the others. "Get ready." He sighted down his rifle, waiting for a clear shot at the pursuers. Lizzie and Grey Dove reached the wider area before Devil's Throat, and dismounted quickly, sending their horses across the narrow passage before taking up defensive positions beside Jonas. "How many?" Jonas asked, noting a bloody gash on Grey Dove's arm. "At least 15, Lizzie replied, reloading her rifle. "El Carnicero himself leads them. We wounded 3, perhaps killed 1, but they keep coming." "They're determined," Grey Dove added, checking her injury with detached interest. "More than usual. The butcher must be desperate." "Desperate men make mistakes." Jonas observed, his eyes fixed on the trail. The torches grew closer, then stopped about 200 yards away, just out of effective rifle range in the darkness. The pursuers had recognized the defensible position and were regrouping. "They'll rush us soon," Lizzie predicted. "Try to overwhelm us with numbers." Jonas nodded his agreement. We need to make the first volley count. After that, it's going to get messy." They didn't have to wait long. A voice called out from the darkness, commanding, accented with the rhythms of northern Mexico. "Calestewa, I know you are there, girl, with the moon mark. There is no escape." Lizzie tensed beside Jonas. "El Carnicero himself," she murmured. "He rarely speaks directly to his quarry." "Show yourself, Calestewa," the voice continued. "Surrender, and your companions will be spared. Resist, and all will die, including the infants." Jonas felt cold rage building within him at the threat to the children. "Does he know who you are?" he asked Lizzie quietly. "That you're my daughter. He knows I'm the white girl with the birthmark," she replied. "Whether he connects me to the scout who deserted years ago, I don't know." The voice came again, closer now. "I have pursued you for 5 years, child of the prophecy, since you escaped from your father's homestead. The time for running is over." A figure emerged from the darkness, a tall man on horseback, his features obscured by shadow and distance. Behind him, his men waited, torches illuminating their weapons, but not their faces. "That's close enough," Jonas called out, raising his rifle. "One more step, and you'll never find whatever treasure you're seeking." The figure halted, surprise evident in his posture. "Who speaks?" he demanded. "Jonas Cutter," he replied, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "The father of the girl you've been hunting, the husband of the woman your men murdered 5 years ago." A moment of silence followed this declaration, then a harsh laugh. "Cutter, I was told you died in your burning cabin. This is unexpected." "Sorry to disappoint you," Jonas replied, keeping his rifle trained on the man. "Now turn around and ride away while you still can." El Carnicero's laugh came again, colder this time. "You are outnumbered, Cutter, trapped on this ridge with women and babes. Be reasonable. The girl is all I want. Give her to me, and the rest of you may go free." "You murdered my wife," Jonas said, his voice deadly quiet. "You've hunted my daughter for 5 years. There will be no deal." "Then you will all die," El Carnicero shouted, his composure cracking. "Men, advance!" The bandits surged forward, spreading out as much as the narrow ridge allowed. Jonas, Lizzie, and Grey Dove opened fire immediately, the sound deafening in the confined space. 2 men fell in the first volley, but the others kept coming, returning fire as they advanced. "There are too many!" Grey Dove shouted over the gunfire, ducking as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. Lizzie fired again, her shot finding its mark in a bandit's chest. "We just need to hold them long enough for the others to get away," she replied. Jonas dispatched another attacker, then glanced behind them. Silent Rain was helping Running Hawk lead the horses across the final section of Devil's Throat Willow, barely staying upright in her saddle. Once across, they would have a clear path down the eastern slope to relative safety. "They're almost across," he reported, turning back to the battle. The bandits were now less than 50 yards away, using every bit of cover the ridge provided. El Carnicero had fallen back, directing his men, but keeping himself out of the line of fire. Coward Jonas thought taking aim at another attacker. The man dropped with a cry, clutching his shoulder. Suddenly from the east, behind them, came new sounds, hoofbeats, the jingle of tack voices calling commands. Jonas risked a quick glance and felt his heart sink. Riders were approaching from the other side of Devil's Throat, at least a dozen moving with military precision. "The army patrol," he warned. "They've caught up to us." Lizzie's expression hardened. "Trapped between Carnicero and the soldiers. Not how I expected this to end." "It's not over yet," Jonas insisted, though he couldn't see a way out of their predicament. Surrounded on both sides, outnumbered with nowhere to retreat on the narrow ridge, their situation was dire indeed. The bandits sensed their advantage and pressed forward more boldly. A bullet grazed Jonas's arm, another tore through Grey Dove's sleeve. Lizzie continued firing with remarkable accuracy, but their ammunition was running low. Then, as the first of the army patrol appeared at the eastern end of Devil's Throat, a familiar voice called out, "Cutter, hold your fire, we're here to help." Jonas squinted through the darkness, hardly daring to believe his ears. Sheriff Blackwood, the leading rider, approached cautiously, hands raised to show he meant no threat. It was indeed Tom Blackwood, though he now wore an army captain's uniform rather than his sheriff's badge. "Captain Blackwood now," he called, "Territorial Militia. Governor Prescott sent us to clean up this mess." "The women?" Jonas asked urgently. "Willow Running Hawk, the children." "Safe," Blackwood assured him. "My men are escorting them down to our camp in the valley." Relief flooded through Jonas, quickly tempered by the realization that El Carnicero's men were still advancing from the west. "We've got bandits on our tail," he warned. "El Carnicero himself." Blackwood nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we're here. The governor's put a price on his head, dead or alive." He gestured to his men. "Take positions. Prepare to engage." The militia riders dismounted, forming a firing line across the narrow ridge. Their presence had an immediate effect on El Carnicero's men, who faltered in their advance, uncertain now that the odds had shifted. "El Carnicero," Blackwood called into the darkness. "You're surrounded. Surrender now." For a moment, silence fell across the ridge. Then came El Carnicero's voice, taut with anger and desperation. "This is not your fight, Captain. My business is with the girl and her father." "You're in American territory, conducting armed operations against American citizens," Blackwood replied. "That makes it very much my fight." Jonas, Lizzie, and Grey Dove had used the respite to reload their weapons and take better positions behind the militia's line. As they did so, Jonas whispered to Blackwood, "How did you know where to find us?" "Followed El Carnicero's men," Blackwood replied quietly. "Been tracking them since they crossed the border 3 days ago. When I realized they were after your daughter," he shrugged. "Let's just say I owed you from that business with the Comanche raiders back in '65. "You knew Lizzie was alive?" Jonas asked, surprised. Blackwood nodded. "Had my suspicions when rumors started about a white woman healing among the Apache. The birthmark confirmed it." He glanced at Lizzie with respect. "She's made quite a name for herself. The army wants her contained because she gives the scattered bands hope. Hollister wants her because she's a symbol, and that butcher out there wants her for his own twisted reasons." "And you?" Jonas asked. "What do you want with my daughter?" Blackwood's expression was serious in the moonlight. "Justice Cutter, for what was done to your wife, to your homestead. For 5 years of grief based on lies." He checked his revolver. "And I intend to get it tonight." Before Jonas could respond, El Carnicero's voice came again, closer now. "The girl Cutter. Give me the girl with the moon mark. And this ends now. She is the key to the treasure. The prophecy must be fulfilled." Lizzie moved forward, her rifle ready. "There is no treasure, Carnicero," she called. "The prophecy speaks of leading my people to safety, not to gold." "Lies," El Carnicero shouted, his composure cracking entirely now. "The mark leads to the lost mine of San Miguel. The conquistador's gold. The only thing my mark leads to is your death," Lizzie replied with cold certainty. for my mother, for the Apache, you've slaughtered for 5 years of hunting me like an animal." With a roar of rage, El Carnicero charged forward, abandoning caution in his obsession. His men followed perhaps more from fear of their leader than conviction in their cause. "Fire!" Blackwood ordered, and the night erupted once more with gunfire. The battle was brief but intense. El Carnicero's men, caught in the open on the narrow ridge, fell one by one to the disciplined volley from the militia. A few turned to flee, only to lose their footing on the treacherous path and plummet into the darkness below. El Carnicero himself fought with the desperation of a man possessed, firing wildly as he advanced. Bullets whizzed past Jonas's head, ricocheted off rocks, found flesh among the militia. "He's coming straight for us." Lizzie observed a strange calm in her voice as she took aim. Jonas and Lizzie fired simultaneously, their bullets striking El Carnicero squarely in the chest. The Mexican bandit staggered, but remained standing, blood darkening his shirt. His eyes, visible now in the light of a fallen torch, were fixed on Lizzie with manic intensity. "The mark!" he gasped, raising his pistol one final time. "Show me the mark." Grey Dove's arrow took him in the throat before he could pull the trigger. El Carnicero dropped to his knees, the pistol falling from his grasp. For a moment, he remained there, swaying, his eyes still locked on Lizzie. Then he toppled sideways over the edge of the ridge, disappearing into the abyss below. A profound silence fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the distant whistle of wind through the canyons. The remaining bandits, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons in surrender. Jonas lowered his rifle, suddenly aware of the exhaustion that permeated every fiber of his being. 5 years of grief, a week of desperate flight, and now this final confrontation. It all caught up to him at once. Lizzie moved to his side, her own fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. "It's over," she said simply. "He's gone." Jonas nodded, unable to find words adequate for the moment. El Carnicero was dead, the immediate threat eliminated. But what did that mean for them? For him and his newly found daughter, for the women who had become his responsibility for the future that stretched before them. Uncertain, but no longer empty. Grey Dove joined them, blood seeping from a fresh wound on her temple, but her eyes clear and alert. "The path is open," she observed, looking eastward beyond Devil's Throat. "We can go down to the valley now." Blackwood approached, holstering his revolver. "My men will handle the prisoners," he said. "You should join the others. The woman with fever, Willow, she needs proper care." "Lizzie can help her," Jonas replied, a note of pride entering his voice. "She's the best healer in the territory." Blackwood nodded, acknowledging this truth. "So I've heard. The healer of 2 worlds, some call her." He glanced at Lizzie with genuine respect. "The governor will want to speak with you, Miss Cutter. There's talk of a formal peace council with the scattered bands, bringing them in without bloodshed. Your influence could make the difference." Lizzie considered this, her expression thoughtful. "I will speak with him," she agreed finally. "But I speak for my people, not for the government. Their welfare comes first." "Fair enough," Blackwood conceded. "For now, let's get you all to safety. It's been a long night." As they prepared to cross Devil's Throat, Jonas found himself walking beside his daughter Grey Dove, a few steps ahead. The first light of dawn was visible on the eastern horizon, casting the world in shades of gray and rose. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Lizzie was silent for a moment, her gaze on the lightening sky. "Now we begin again," she said finally. "All of us. The mixed band will need a new home, somewhere safe from both the army and those who would exploit them. The women, running hawk, silent rain willow. They need a place to raise their children in peace. And you, Jonas asked the question that mattered most to him. What do you need, Lizzie? She looked at him, then her expression softening. I stopped being just Lizzie years ago, Father. I am Calistewa now as well, the sparrow woman, the healer. I cannot abandon those who have come to depend on me. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. But I lost my father once. I don't intend to lose him again. You won't, Jonas promised, his heart full. Whatever you decide, wherever you go, I'll be there. If you'll have me. Lizzie smiled, then the first true smile he had seen from her, transforming her face and revealing the child he remembered beneath the woman she had become. I'd like that, she said simply. They crossed Devil's Throat as the sun broke fully above the eastern peaks, bathing the world in golden light. Below in the valley they could see Blackwood's camp, tents, horses, and among them the small group of women and infants they had fought so desperately to protect. As they descended toward the camp, Grey Dove fell into step beside them. The prophecy, she said thoughtfully. It spoke of the child with the moon mark, leading our people to safety in their darkest hour. And has it been fulfilled? Jonas asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Grey Dove considered this her usual stoicism, giving way to a more contemplative expression. Perhaps, or perhaps, it is just beginning. She gestured toward the valley where Running Hawk stood with Morning Star and Willow's son in her arms waiting for their return. Two children of two bloods born in the shadow of destruction. The next generation. They will need guardians who understand both worlds. Honaz looked at his daughter, seeing her anew in this light, not just as his child returned to him, but as a bridge between worlds in conflict, a healer of more than just physical wounds. Then they'll have them, he said with certainty. All of us together. As they reached the valley floor, the sun now fully risen on a new day, Jonas felt something he had not experienced in 5 long years. The weight of purpose, of belonging, of family, restored and expanded beyond anything he could have imagined when Running Hawk first knocked on his cabin door. The land of the opposed had claimed him once more, but not as a man alone. This time he stood with one foot in each world, a position not of conflict, but of possibility. And in that moment, Jonas Cutter knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them as he faced the rising sun. Eyes open, heart full, surrounded by those who had, against all odds, become his people. The journey home would be long. But for the first time in 5 years, Jonas truly believed there was a home to journey toward.